Chapter 372. Li didn't make egg fried rice this time. The food in the palace was rich in ingredients, and many of them couldn't be found outside. It was a great waste of resources to only take some plain rice and 2 eggs. He carried Princess Yongning to a chair, and let her sit quietly while he busied himself in front of the stove. In just half an hour, 2 bowls of steaming hot noodles were ready to be served. Some time ago, he had obtained the secret recipe of his noodles from his aunt. After Li Yi's own modification, the ingredients used were richer while retaining the original taste. Looking at the 2 sitting on the stone table in the courtyard, the aroma wafting far away, the manager of the food bureau swallowed a mouthful of saliva. After taking a glance at the pot, he wanted to cry but had no tears. "You're eating noodles, at least leave some soup for me." The food in the palace should have been innovated long ago. Being able to make ordinary noodles so extraordinary, he might be able to gain the favor of those nobles. This was a great credit to him. Princess Yongning only lowered her head to eat, and was still unwilling to talk. However, Li Yi understood that going too far was as bad as not going far enough. It was already a great improvement for her to reach out to him. It would be good to change slowly. If he acted too impatient and caused her disgust, all his previous efforts would be wasted. After the meal, Li Yi held Princess Yongning's hand and walked back to the original place. There were already a few eunuchs and palace maids waiting anxiously. "See you tomorrow." After handing her over to a palace maid, Li Yi turned around and waved his hand. Then he turned and walked in the direction of the palace gate. The little girl looked in the direction he left, and didn't look away for a long time until his figure disappeared. Li Yi decided to teach them all the contents of the book in a short period of time, and then let them slowly digest and learn by themselves. That way, he would have enough time to do his own things. The number of lessons each month was set by the old emperor, but how to go about it and which 4 days to choose was up to Li Yi himself. He only needed to teach them everything that should be taught. When he walked out of the palace gate, Mississippi Lu was already waiting for him in the carriage. Li Yi didn't go home first. He planned to go to the Crown Prince's residence first. There was a need to inform him about the banquet that the King of Shu had invited. The gatekeeper of the Crown Prince's residence was very cordial to him. He told him that the Crown Prince had left early in the morning, and should be returning soon. He asked him to wait for a while in the residence. When Mississippi Lu saw the guards of the prince's mansion flying around on the grassy slope at the back and having a great time, she lost all interest in drinking tea in her room. Li Yi sat in a hall, and occasionally saw a shadow flitting across his sight. Actually, gliders could only allow people to experience the pleasure of flying. If they wanted to fly higher, according to the current technology, they might not be able to build a human-powered plane. However, they could consider a hot air balloon. Li Xian was now studying air, levitation, or aerodynamics. Any one of these subjects was enough to take him a lifetime. It was unimaginable for Li Yi. Fortunately, he could enjoy himself, so he just let him be. When he was halfway through his cup of tea, he didn't see Li Xian. Instead, a maidservant of the Crown Prince's residence appeared. "Excuse me, are you County Magistrate Li?" The maidservant walked in slowly, and asked while blinking her eyes at Li Yi. Li Yi nodded and asked, "Has the Crown Prince returned?" The maidservant shook her head and said, "The Crown Prince hasn't returned yet. I'm under the orders of the Crown Prince's wife to invite County Magistrate Li over." "What? The Crown Prince's wife?" Li Yi was slightly startled when he heard the maidservant. The Crown Prince's wife invited him over? Where? He was indeed familiar with Li Xian, but he had only seen the Crown Prince's wife a few times. They didn't even talk to each other. Why was she looking for him? However, since Li Xian wasn't here, the other party was the master of the Crown Prince's residence. Li Yi couldn't refuse, nor did he have any reason to refuse. He was led by the maidservant through 2 long corridors and finally arrived in front of a palace. "Lord Ju, please follow me," the maidservant said and walked in first. "Crown Prince's wife, County Magistrate Li is here." The maidservant spoke respectfully to the figure behind the curtain, before slowly retreating. Li Yi wasn't surprised by the curtain in front of him. The royal family and those big clans valued etiquette the most. A man and a woman alone in a room should avoid suspicion. Otherwise, when Li Xian came back and saw him with his crown prince's wife, he didn't know what he would think. Although he had said that he would give the crown prince's wife to him, he was drunk at that time and couldn't take it seriously. In an unfamiliar environment, Li would always subconsciously look around. This was obviously not the crown prince's wife's boudoir. It was more like a study. There were 2 rows of bookshelves, and there were some calligraphy and paintings hanging on the walls. At a glance, one could tell that they were the works of a woman. Li Yi could be considered an expert in these 2 fields. The calligraphy and paintings were new and probably not made for a long time. It was very likely that they were made by the crown prince's wife. When Li Xian was drunk at Prosperity Lane, he had said that the heir consort he was going to marry was a noble daughter of the Jing kingdom. Not only was she extremely beautiful, but she was also well educated and well versed in music, chess, calligraphy and painting. From the looks of it now, it was not an exaggeration at all. It was a pity that he didn't agree to exchange with him at that time. I took the liberty of inviting Li Xianzi here. I hope you don't mind. Soon, a voice came from behind the curtain. The voice was very gentle. At first glance, one could tell that it was a well-educated and well-behaved girl from a humble family. She was the polar opposite of Mississippi Lu, who spoke with sword intent. Crown Prince's wife is too polite. Li Yi pretended that he didn't care and asked directly, "May I know why Crown Prince's wife asked me to come here?" In fact, Li Yi was not good at dealing with strangers, especially strange women, so he didn't beat around the bush. The other side didn't seem to expect that Li Yi would be so straightforward. After a moment of silence, she asked, "May I know when Li Xianzi and Crown Prince met?" Hearing this, Li Yi was stunned. Crown Prince's wife asked him to come here just to ask this question? After thinking for a while, he said, "It was only a few months. When you were in Qing'an Prefecture, right?" The voice came from behind the curtain again. "That's right." Li Yi nodded and said. He raised his head and looked into the curtain. He felt that the tone of Crown Prince's wife was strange. Why did she ask this question? Was she worried that he would steal her man? There was no need for that. From the beginning to the end, his sexual orientation was very normal. As for Li Xian, he didn't have a sexual orientation at all. Then how much does Li Xianzi know about Crown Prince? The voice from behind the curtain was still gentle. Li finally realized what was so strange about it. As the Crown Prince's wife of Li Xian, how could she ask him how much he knew about Li Xian? He was not Uncle Li from downstairs. Li Xian slept in the same bed with her. Shouldn't she be the one who knew Li Xian the best? Could it be? Li looked into the curtain again and suddenly thought of a possibility. That guy Li Xian couldn't still be. How could it be possible? They were married for a long time. How could there be a couple who hadn't consummated their marriage after a month? Even Lu Xiaohui couldn't do it, unless the man had no sex. Pooh! There seemed to be something wrong. Chapter 373. There should be no problem with Li Xian's sexual orientation. After all, there was a period of time when his dream was to be sought after by countless women in Qing'an Prefecture, and not by those talented men. But now his mind was filled with those strange things, and going to heaven had become his only dream. But why was this? How could a hedonistic son of the imperial family change so much in such a short period of time? What exactly happened to him? Was it his nature, or was it someone else's intervention? Well, this was not important. Li Yi swore to the heavens that he had only inspired him a little. If he had known that he had the potential to become a scientist in his bones, Li Yi would not have committed such a sin no matter what. As the saying goes, it is better to destroy a temple than to destroy a marriage. To let a girl with impeccable family background, appearance and talent stay alone and become a living widow, this was much more serious than destroying a marriage. Just thinking about the word destroying a marriage made Li Yi shiver. He couldn't help but think of Miss Chen's hysterical voice. If he didn't like her, then he didn't like her. No matter how much virtue he accumulated or how many pagodas he built, it wouldn't be enough to atone for his crime. Li Xianzi. Seeing that there was no reply for a long time, the woman behind the curtain softly reminded him. Li Yi came back to his senses and said, Crown Prince is a good person. How much did he know about Li Xian? This was not a standard question. Should he answer very well? Generally, or don't know? This crown prince's wife obviously didn't have any experience in dealing with strangers. Otherwise she wouldn't have asked such a low-standard question. Good person? Yes, crown prince is a good person. Li nodded and said. Although using words like weirdo, stupid, and stupid to describe Li Xian might be more appropriate, he was in front of the crown prince's wife, so he had to at least give him some face. He had so many flaws that they were innumerable, but Li Xian was still worthy of being called a good person. Li Xianzi, can you give me more details? The voice behind the curtain sounded a little embarrassed. Li sighed, thinking that this Miss Wang must not have had it easy, marrying someone she had never met before. Her married life must not have been very rooey. One had to know that Li Xian had expressed his opposition to this marriage a long time ago. He wanted to find a woman he liked and have a passionate relationship with her. It would be best if they could elope or something like that. Thus, no matter how outstanding the young miss of the Wang family was, she was not chosen by Li Xian himself. Naturally, he would shift his resistance to her. This was also the reason why Li Yi was here. She was in the best period of her life and was full of yearning for love, but reality poured cold water on her. She didn't want her life to go on like this. She wanted to change, but she didn't know how to change. The dignified crown prince's concubine was no different from an ordinary woman in this matter. At least half of the reason why things became like this was because of him. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, just as I said, Crown Prince is a good person. He does not have the arrogance of a member of the royal family, does not like to put on airs, likes to pretend to be an ordinary person, and mingles with the lower class. He will definitely speak up when he sees injustice. He likes to drink, but his tolerance is very low. He will pass out after one glass of strong wine without water, likes to talk nonsense when drunk, and has a lot to say during meals. He likes to go to brothels, only listens to songs, and does not ask for girls. He also likes all kinds of novel or strange things. If you want to get along well with him, you must know that if two stones of different sizes fall from the same height, they will fall at the same time. You must also know that the ground under our feet is not flat, but a ball. From the Crown Prince's residence, it will take us a long time to return to the starting point. Recently, Crown Prince has been studying problems related to the air. Just like what Crown Prince's wife saw. Those guards fly in the sky with big kites on their backs. In a few days, they might sit on a ball that can spit fire and fly even higher. In order to make up for his sins, Li Yi had exposed Li Xian's past. If it was not for the fact that he really did not know about it, he would have revealed whether or not Li Xian had a mole on his butt. Glancing at the woman behind the curtain, who seemed to be extremely shocked, he sighed in his heart. Miss, I can only help you to this point. You have to walk the rest of the road by yourself. If it was not for the fact that he was worried that this noble lady's heart was too conservative and could not accept it, Li even wanted to suggest that she directly drug Li Xian's food. Once the rice was cooked, he would not be able to deny it even if he wanted to. In fact, Crown Prince's wife was not that shocked. Crown Prince's husband was a strange person. She knew this from the first day she married into Crown Prince's residence. On the night of their wedding, she sat on the bed all night, and he sat by the table all night. The two of them just sat like that, not drinking wine, not having the pleasure of the boudoir. None of the things that her mother taught her before she got married were used. Later, he slept in the study every night, and never once stepped into the wedding room. He was very kind to her, very kind. The two of them were more like strangers than husband and wife. She could not walk into his world, and he had never tried to get close to her. The two of them ate together, went out, and went to the cold mountain temple to pray, but that was all they had in common. Before she got married, she had fantasized about what her future husband would be like. Would he be a courteous young man? Or a violent playboy from the royal family? Or perhaps he was just a mediocre crown prince. However, none of these were true. He was courteous and not a playboy at all. Of course, he was not mediocre either. He was highly regarded by the current emperor, and was appointed as the supervisor of Jiangyi province. His ability was equally outstanding, and he could actually make people soar in the sky like a bird. He was so outstanding. He and Gu Shijie were people from two completely different worlds. However, she was not reconciled to it. She had also longed for a Rui husband, just like her current husband. She also hoped that she and her husband could be like her parents. Since God would not directly grant her these things, she certainly had to strive for them through her own efforts. Seeing that there was no movement behind the curtain for a long time, Li shook his head. He did not disturb her and slowly retreated from the room. Li Xian's imperial concubine was clearly a woman with her own ideas. This was something that everyone admired. Li Yi had tried his best to do what he could. He hoped that she could get what she wanted. Li Xian was the kind of person who could not be pulled back after he had made a decision. This was the most he could do. After all, things like entering the bridal chamber should be done by the couple themselves, and he could not help much. Li Xian had not returned yet, and Li Yi did not continue to wait. After leaving a letter, he dragged Mississippi Lu out of the prince's mansion. At the same time, a finished glider of the prince's mansion was also dragged away. The guards of Prince Ning's mansion could not keep something that Mississippi Lu wanted. Chapter 374. The King of Shu's Invitation? During dinner, Li Xian held a paper raft in his hand. He shook his head and murmured, "He's been targeted so quickly. As expected, no matter where he is, he'll be noticed in the shortest amount of time. Forget it, forget it. That guy is likely to be the future emperor, and he's very vengeful. It's not good to offend him." He casually put the paper raft aside, clearly not taking this matter to heart. Offending a prince who could ascend the throne was clearly not a wise decision for Li Yi. However, he himself was not worried. He and the King of Shu did not see eye to eye, but in the worst case he could just return to Qing and prefecture. The King of Shu would not make a move against a powerful prince over such a small matter. In the room, other than the servants standing to the left and right, there was only the crown prince and his consort eating at the table. Husband. When dinner was about to end, the crown prince's consort suddenly put down her jade chopsticks and looked up at Li Xian. "What's the matter?" Li Xian looked at her in confusion. Although they were husband and wife in name, the two of them did not speak much, especially during dinner. These days, he had long gotten used to this kind of silence. "When I was tidying up the study today, I saw a document that my husband dropped. It said that 2 stones of different sizes fell from the same height and landed at the same time. Is that true?" The crown prince's consort looked at Li Xian with a faint expression of confusion. Shouldn't the big stone fall first? Hearing this, Li Xian was startled. It seemed that he did not expect the crown prince's consort to ask him this question. It turned out that she was not only interested in calligraphy and painting. Other than the 4 arts, Li Xian suddenly discovered another side of the crown prince's consort. Inexplicably, his mood improved. He put down his chopsticks and stood up. Practice is the only way to test the truth. As for what the truth of the matter is, we'll know by doing an experiment. Walking out of the door, he waved at a guard not far away and said, "Lu Liang, come over here. Pick up 2 stones and climb up to the roof." The guards of the crown prince's residence were already familiar with this kind of thing. Throwing stones, leaves, silver, and what kind of effect would satisfy the crown prince? This was a piece of cake for them. How could this be? Seeing the 2 stones fall to the ground at the same time, the crown prince's consort revealed a look of perfect disbelief. Li Xian held her hand and only let go after bringing her to the spot where the stone landed. He explained with a smile. "Actually, the size of the stone has nothing to do with its size. However, if it's a stone or a leaf, the result will be different. This means that our surroundings are filled with something that I call air." Seeing the crown princess looking at him with admiration, Li Xian only felt very carefree in his heart. Other than Li Yi, there was actually someone else who was interested in what he did. No, Li had never been interested in what he was doing. He was an omniscient pervert. It was hard to find a confidant in one's life. Li Xian, who was in an extremely excited state, naturally did not notice the faint smile on the crown prince's consort's face. How could those guards fly on a kite? Li Xian furrowed his brows. He was aware of the situation, but he didn't know why. He scratched his head and said, "This problem is rather complicated. I only have some ideas. Let's go to the study room and talk about it." Hey, take it easy. If you break your leg or something, I don't want to take care of you for the rest of your life. Mississippi Lou found a new toy. A low slope behind the Viscount's residence became her private territory. Lee stood at the top of the slope and watched speechlessly as she tirelessly repeated the climbing and gliding movements over and over again. He thought to himself that the height of this thing was not even as high as her own Qinggong. How old was she already, and yet she was still playing such childish games? Rui said with a smile, "Don't worry, husband. It's not high here. Even if she really falls from above, it's okay." Xiao Huan enviously watched Second Miss flying around in the sky like a bird. She wanted to try it, but she could not make up her mind. She was afraid of being high up. The roof was already the highest place she could accept. Since a few days ago, the weather had begun to warm up. Today, the sun was shining brightly. It was not suitable to stay at home. Of course, it was not suitable to go to the palace to teach. It was definitely a good choice for a family outing. Lee decided to ignore Mississippi Lou and concentrate on his barbecue business. When he came back from the palace yesterday, he patrolled the food bureau as usual and gained a lot. 2 eggplants and some rare fresh green vegetables. At that time, the manager's face also seemed to turn green. This was not very important. After watching Mississippi Lou fly the kite for a while, the little fatty and Duanwu ran over and watched Lee barbecue without blinking. The former swallowed a lot of saliva. The 2 old madams were basking in the sun and talking under the grassy slope. There were guards of the 2 families around them. In fact, there was nothing to be vigilant about. Within a radius of 10 miles of this manor, the Viscount's mansion was the only supreme existence. There would be no blind guy making trouble around the Viscount's mansion. Rui came over and helped him stir the charcoal fire. She said, "Husband, remember to let Rui go with you when you go to the banquet at the King of Shu's mansion tonight." Ever since the incident with the crazy monk, everyone began to pay more attention to his safety. The old madam even transferred the head guard of the Li mansion here. Of course, with Rui there, it did not make much difference whether there were guards or not. However, Rui could stay at home and could not always follow him when he went out. It was fine when Fong was there, but now that Fong had returned to Qing and mansion to take care of the family moving to the capital, there was only Mississippi Lou by his side. Li nodded. He would not joke about his own safety. For the time being, he could only let Mississippi Lou follow him. When Fong and the others arrived, things would be much easier. Although the capital was good, it was not as convenient as when he was in Qing and mansion. Many times when he encountered something, there was no one around him who could be used. At the same time, he also lacked a key sense of control, which made him resist the capital in his heart. Okay, it's almost done, right? The aroma hit his nose, and the little fatty almost couldn't hold back his saliva. Li pushed away the fat hand he reached over and said, "If it's not cooked, you will have diarrhea. Go play in the side and I'll call you when it's done." The little fatty and Duanwu went to observe Mississippi Lou again. Li tilted his head and asked Rui, "What do you think of what I said last night?" Rui smiled and said, "Wherever husband goes, I will naturally go." Li nodded and said, "That's good. During this time, I will take care of the matters in the palace as soon as possible. When the weather gets warmer, we will leave." Not far from the 2 of them, the little girl, who seemed to be paying attention to the second miss, scratched her head in confusion. Why did the young miss and the son-in-law never tell her where they were going? Could it be that they were eloping? Thinking of a terrible possibility, she immediately became nervous. Chapter 375. Tonight was the day of the King of Shu's banquet. Li only intended to go through the motions and not embarrass the king. Therefore, he did not need to prepare much. In the afternoon, he was still preparing for his lessons in his room. If he wanted to return to Qing and prefecture as soon as possible, he had to get rid of those little troubles as soon as possible. However, he could not simply fool those little princes and princesses. That was equivalent to lying to the emperor. Li could only work hard to be a dutiful teacher. "Son-in-law, the clothes are on the bed." Xiao Huan walked in from outside and placed a stack of clothes at the head of Li's bed. Although she was still Rui's personal maidservant, in this household, She was actually the same as the master. She did not need to do such menial work. However, when it involved Li Yi or Rui, she would do it herself and never let other maidservants interfere. After placing the folded clothes on the head of Li Yi's bed, she did not leave. With her hands behind her back, she walked with small steps to Li Yi's side and looked at the table. She thought to herself, what is the son-in-law writing? Is it a farewell letter to me and second miss? Is the son-in-law really going to elope with second miss and abandon them? What are you looking at? Li Yi turned to look at her, and asked curiously. Since the morning, the little maidservant's actions had become somewhat strange. She clearly did not know a few words, but she still pretended to look at what he was writing. In the past, she would never be like this. No, no. Xiao Huan shook her head like a rattledrum, and immediately ran out of the room. Li Yi looked at her with some inexplicable confusion. He found that it was getting late, and it was time to go to the King of Shu's banquet. Although the King of Shu was not the legitimate son, he was the eldest son of the current emperor. A few years ago, he moved out of the palace. Unlike the other princes, the King of Shu did not go to his own fief but stayed in the capital. Not only that, the King of Shu's mansion was also widely accepted. Usually, the guests were not children of high officials or noble families. All the young talents were proud to make friends with the King of Shu. Of course, the King of Shu was also a dragon among men. He was well versed in both literature and martial arts, and had a very high reputation in the capital. For an ordinary prince, it was a taboo to not obediently stay in his own fief, and instead spread his wings in the capital. Now the King of Shu was still His Majesty's world. Was a prince trying to rebel? However, the King of Shu was not an ordinary prince. He was the first prince, born of noble concubine Cui. In the absence of the Empress's legitimate son, the King of Shu was the only candidate to enter the East Palace, according to the royal family's principle of choosing the eldest son over the concubine. Countless people believed that the King of Shu would be the future crown prince, and the next monarch of the Jing kingdom. Therefore, even the censorate turned a blind eye to his actions. In addition, the Cui family behind concubine Cui added fuel to the fire, causing the King of Shu's reputation to be unparalleled. Other than the fact that he still lacked the emperor's personal edict, he was no different from the crown prince. This was also the reason why Li Yi did not refuse the King of Shu's invitation. Although he felt helpless, he had to admit that he could not afford to offend the King of Shu. If the future emperor of the Jing kingdom bore a grudge against him, there would be no place for him in Qing, and prefecture or even the entire Jing kingdom, let alone the capital. It was easy to imagine what he would have to live in the future. Could it be that he really had to bring his entire family far away from the Jing kingdom, and live a miserable life? It was not easy to live in this damn feudal society. He cursed in his heart, took 2 steps forward and handed the invitation to the servant of the King of Shu's mansion. It's Li Xianzi. Welcome, welcome. The servant of the King of Shu's mansion had a signature smile on his face. When facing Li Yi, there was no expression of respect on his face at all. This was normal. He did not know how many marquises he had received. There were at least 80 if not 100 marquises in the capital. If he was not a guest of His Highness, he would not even look at him. Young Duke Qin, come in, come in. Not far from Li Yi, another servant invited a young man into the mansion with a face full of smiles. The servant behind the young man handed a brocade box to the servant and said, "This is the authentic work of Duke Xue. I know that Your Highness likes Duke Xue's calligraphy, so I spent a lot of effort to find it." Hearing the 2 words Duke Xue, Li Yi was slightly absent-minded for a moment. He only knew that Duke Xue was a calligraphy grandmaster in the Jing kingdom, and seemed to have a high status in the imperial court. During Madame Dowager's birthday banquet, Yin Zhang and the man named Wuxia had mentioned him. County Magistrate Li? Suddenly, he heard the servant's voice. Li Yi came to his senses and turned to look at him. He asked, "Is there anything else?" The servant looked at him and asked tentatively, "Your greeting." "Greeting?" Li Yi turned around and exchanged a glance with second Miss Lu. When the King of Shu sent someone to deliver the invitation to him, he never mentioned anything about paying respects to the emperor. Who knew that there was such a rule in the capital that guests had to bring gifts? Li Yi looked at the servant and asked, If I don't pay my respects, can I not enter? He thought that if this was the case, it would be a good reason for him to go home. No, there is no such rule. The servant was stunned for a moment, then immediately shook his head and said, there was no rule that one could not visit the King of Shu's mansion without greeting. However, everyone was a person of high status. It was the most basic etiquette to prepare a small gift when visiting. It was also a sign of respect for the King of Shu. After all, you are a viscount. Do you have to be so stingy? County magistrate, please. The servant thought so in his heart, but he could not say it out loud. He could only helplessly make an inviting gesture. He knew that the King of Shu wouldn't care if he paid his respects or not, but as a guest, how could he be so insensible? At this time, Li Yi had already noticed that except for him, everyone who entered the king's mansion would bring gifts. It seemed that there was such a rule in the capital. This was a good practice. When he made more friends in the future, he did not need to do business. He could just hold banquets at home every day. He was sure that he would receive so many gifts that his hands would cramp. Then he could sell them and earn money. Fortunately, he did not know this rule. He did not plan to invite the King of Shu in the future. If he could not take back his gifts, he might as well not give them. He shook his head and stepped into the mansion. As his personal female bodyguard, Mississippi Lu naturally had to follow him. Miss, wait. The servant hurriedly reached out to stop her. Why? Only one person can enter with one greeting card? Li Yi turned his head and asked with a frown. No. The servant hurriedly shook his head. He pointed to the sword in Lu Rui's hand and said, since it was brought by County Magistrate Li, of course, you can enter. However, you are not allowed to bring weapons into the mansion. You need to leave this sword here, and take it with you when you leave. The King of Shu was a very important person. If something happened to him, no one related to him would be able to escape. Of course, this included all the servants in the mansion. Although the strict rules in the mansion were not as strict as those in the palace, there was a strict rule. Except for the guards in the mansion, no one was allowed to bring weapons into the mansion. Of course, such a long sword could not be brought in. Mississippi Lu's sword was almost always with her. Once, Li Yi could not find a suitable weapon to kill fish. He stole Mississippi Lu's sword when she was not paying attention. As a result, he was chased by her for half a day. His buttocks were swollen, and he could not get out of bed for 2 days. It could be seen how much she treasured this sword. He thought that she would refuse. Unexpectedly, she only glanced at the servant indifferently and placed the sword on the table behind her. Watch it carefully. Li Yi reminded the servant. The servant smiled and nodded. However, in his heart he despised the sword. What was there to be careful of with such a broken sword? Any sword in the mansion was many times better than this. He raised his head and looked at Li Yi. He was extremely suspicious. Why would the prince invite such a country bumpkin? Chapter 376. A small viscount was not worthy of the servants of the King of Shu's mansion to treat him with respect, let alone a country bumpkin viscount. A servant led him to a large pavilion and placed him in a relatively remote corner. The interior of the building was brightly lit. From time to time, people would enter and leave, and the surroundings were filled with noises. On the table in front of him were all sorts of fruits, vegetables, and pastries. The drinks were of high quality, and the standard was not low. From this, it could be seen that the King of Shu was also a man of taste. There were rows of tables on both sides. At this time, some of the tables were already occupied, and some acquaintances were gathered together, laughing and chatting loudly. More than 10 dancers were dancing on the red carpet in the center. Their ankles were bare, and their clothes were revealing. As they danced, a piece of smooth skin would often be exposed. If he didn't know that this was the King of Shu's mansion, Li Yi might have thought that this was a place like the Myriad Fragrance Pavilion or the Jade Courtyard. The dancers danced so coquettishly that many people stared at them, as if their souls had been hooked. Is it beautiful? Just as Li Yi was engrossed in watching, a faint voice came from beside him. Beautiful. Li Yi nodded. As soon as he said this word, he immediately realized something. He changed his tone and said with a serious expression, "Beautiful my ass. This is not a dance. It's obviously coquettish. It's an insult to the culture. I didn't expect the king of Shu to be such a person. It's really disappointing. Li Yi deeply condemned the hypocritical behavior of the king of Shu. He moved his eyes away from the dancers and chanting figures, and focused on drinking a pot of grape wine in front of him. As he raised his glass, he stole a glance at the scene. The king of Shu was also a person who knew how to enjoy. This figure, this waist, this flexibility. Even without looking at their faces, he could give these dancers a superb evaluation. This occasion was actually not suitable for Mississippi Lu. There was no other woman here except her. In this era, there were not many entertainment activities. It was normal for a group of men to gather together to watch an erotic dance. If not for the special status of the king of Shu inviting this group of people to a banquet in a brothel, the atmosphere would definitely be more harmonious. Of course, Li didn't have dirty thoughts like most people. He was purely appreciating art. Unfortunately, Mississippi Lu's artistic attainment was still far from his. She only saw their flirtatious and explicit side, but didn't understand the essence of the dancer's dance. How dare you? How dare you talk about the king of Shu behind his back? Although Li Yi had deliberately lowered his voice when he spoke just now, it was still heard by someone at the neighboring table. A well-dressed young man with a scholarly aura stood up from his seat and loudly reprimanded him. Li Yi didn't expect him to have such a big reaction. He didn't have much interaction with the king of Shu, so there was no grudge between them. What he said just now was just a joke. But looking at the young man's reaction, it was as if he had insulted his ancestors. Li Yi raised his head, looked at him and said, "It was just a joke. Why do you take it so seriously?" The young man snorted and said, "How can you joke about the king of Shu's status?" Li Yi frowned. There was no enmity between the two of them. It was a little too much for the young man to latch onto his unintentional words. Even if he wanted to curry favor with the king of Shu, he didn't have to use such a method, right? This kind of person couldn't be bothered with. The more he was bothered, the more excited he would be. Li Yi could pack up and go home after he was done today. He didn't even stand up and turned his head to continue admiring the art. The young man opened his mouth, but he didn't know how to continue the words he had prepared. Of course, it had nothing to do with him if someone spoke rudely to the king of Shu. But if he didn't do something special tonight, how could he get the attention of the king of Shu? Everyone knew that the king of Shu was the most promising one among all the princes to ascend to the throne. For them, getting close to the king of Shu and befriending him was undoubtedly a shortcut to the peak of life. However, there were many people who had the same idea as him, including many high-ranking officials and dignitaries. He could only write a few good poems. In the end, he was just a commoner. If he wanted to stand out, he naturally had to do something different. When someone spoke rudely to the king of Shu, he had to stand up and reprimand him righteously, expressing his endless admiration for the king of Shu. Even if he could win a little favor from the king of Shu, it would be enough. Of course, he was selective. He couldn't afford to offend the person who was respectfully invited by the steward of the prince's mansion. But the person who was brought here with a look of disdain by the servants of the prince's mansion, and sat in a more remote place than him was, of course, the best choice. The young man in front of him, who looked unfamiliar and obviously didn't have a strong background, was a very good breakthrough. He had already predicted what would happen next. He was just waiting for the servants of the prince's mansion to chase the guy who spoke rudely to the king of Shu out, so that he could show his face a little. But he didn't expect that the other party would be so cowardly, making all his preparations go up in smoke. If he continued to pester him, he was afraid that he would be chased out by the steward of the prince's mansion as a troublemaker. Helplessly, the young man glanced at Li Yi and could only sit back down. "Is the king of Shu very famous?" Mississippi Lu grabbed the wine pot from Li Yi's hand and poured herself a glass of grape wine. She looked around with her beautiful eyes. Even though she was not familiar with the princesses and kings of the royal family, she didn't think that an ordinary prince could handle such a scene. Not only is he famous, he is the prince who is most likely to become the emperor in the future. How can he not be famous? Li Yi said lazily. Lu Rui pursed her lips and said, "Is it good to be the emperor?" Most of the time Mississippi Lu was cold, but she was also quite cute when she was playful. Li Yi glanced at her and said in a low voice, "Of course it's good to be the emperor. Who doesn't want to be the emperor? He has the final say in such a big country. He can decide the life and death of people with one word. And he can decide the fate of countless people with one thought. More importantly, after becoming the emperor, he can marry many concubines. He can have 3 palaces and 6 courtyards, 72 concubines, and 3,000 beauties in the harem." Li glanced at Mississippi Lu and saw her unkind eyes. He said righteously, "So there is really nothing good about being the emperor. The main thing is that the body can't take it. If you don't believe me, think about it. Which emperor in history has lived a long life?" Li used facts to prove why being the emperor was not good at all. If one wanted to live a long life, he had to give up the emperor's position as soon as possible. The right way was to consolidate his foundation and strengthen his body and kidneys. At some point, the noisy crowd suddenly became quiet, and people began to rush to the door. Li Yi turned his head and saw a few figures, led by the king of Shu, walking in from outside. The main character had arrived. In order to show respect to the king of Shu, most people stood up from their seats and went forward to welcome him, regardless of their status. Li Yi and Mississippi Lu's seats were in the most remote corner of the hall. The young man beside him had already gone forward to welcome them. Looking at the king of Shu, who was surrounded by many people, Li Yi made the wise decision to sit here. The crowd quickly dispersed and the king of Shu walked forward, surrounded by the crowd. Li Yi glanced at him inadvertently, and saw a figure behind the king of Shu that surprised him. "Why is he here too?" Seeing the slightly familiar face, Li Yi murmured in surprise. Cui Yanxin, a former jinshi. When he made things difficult for Wan Ruoqing in Prince Ning's mansion, he had a conflict with him. He didn't know what happened after that. He didn't expect to see him on such an occasion. Wait a minute. The king of Shu's mother is concubine Cui. The Cui family's sphere of influence is in Lin city of Qing and prefecture. Cui Yanxin's surname is also Cui. Obviously, he is the king of Shu's follower now. Is there any connection between these two? Chapter 377. As the saying goes, enemies are bound to meet on a narrow road. Now that they had bumped into each other, the atmosphere was a little awkward. Fortunately, the corner where Li Yi and Rui were at was remote and secluded enough. Cui Yanxin's attention seemed to be on the king of Shu and did not see him. She shifted her gaze away from Cui Yanxin's body. Suddenly, she felt as if someone's gaze had landed on her. Li looked up and saw a familiar face diagonally in front of him. If he remembered correctly, that scholarly young man's name was Chun Liqing, a member of Duke Chen's estate. Just a few days ago, under the plum tree in the cold mountain temple, Chun Liqing had argued with him. In the end, Li Xian's bodyguards had broken the legs of the servants in his clan. Speaking of which, the conflict between the two of them was not small. It was a mistake to attend the king of Shu's banquet tonight. He only had a few enemies in the capital, but he had met almost all of them. The king of Shu stood in front of the crowd with a cup of wine in his hand and said, "Thank you for giving I face and attending the banquet in my mansion. I will drink the first cup of wine as a sign of respect." Of course, this sentence was out of politeness. Among all the young talents in the capital, except for Li Xian, who dared not to give face to the king of Shu, no one would be willing to offend the future emperor. Due to their status, their clans might not have official dealings with the king of Shu, but the relationship between the younger generation had always been more ambiguous. On this point, regardless of whether one was a staunch supporter of the king of Shu, the decisions made were generally the same. There was nothing wrong with befriending the king of Shu. They had to leave a way out for their families. After the king of Shu drank a cup of wine, the atmosphere in the banquet became lively. Eating, drinking, and having fun were the main theme of the banquet. Some people took this opportunity to connect with old friends, while others talked in low voices with the king of Shu. They were full of smiles and their eyes were full of lust. The king of Shu listened and nodded his head repeatedly. It was unknown what kind of shady deals they had secretly made. The dancers had already retreated, leaving behind a group of men who were whispering to each other. Those who were in the know would have thought that this was the banquet of the king of Shu, while those who didn't would have thought that they had come to a large-scale gay dating party. Li Yi, on the other hand, was different. Although Mississippi Lou was not very willing to talk, it was impossible for them to be intimate. However, she was still beautiful. Glancing at her would inexplicably improve his mood, wouldn't it? Li was in a good mood, but some people were in a bad mood. Cui Yanqing was one of them. As a new Jinshi and a descendant of the Cui family, although he was only a member of a branch family, under the influence of the Cui family, he could seek a better job and work hard for a few years. Although he might not have a bright future, it would be much better than his current situation of waiting at home. Wasn't it because in Ningguang Fu, he had belittled a lowly performer? A new Jinshi. How did he end up like this? Of course, Cui Yanqing knew why he ended up like this. He didn't dare to hate Ningguang, the Ministry of Personnel, and of course, he didn't dare to hate the current emperor. He only hated the detestable Anxi County magistrate, who had stood up for the lowly performer, causing him to lose face that night. Even now, the hat of expressing sorrow because of a new poem was firmly pinned on his head, becoming a lifetime of shame. If he didn't take revenge, he wouldn't be a gentleman, but not now. Cui Yanqing clenched his teeth. What he had to do now was to closely follow the king of Shu, and do his best to gain the prince's attention. When the prince ascended to the throne in the future, he would definitely not mistreat him. It was never too late for a gentleman to take revenge 10 years later. Moreover, everyone knew that the emperor's physical condition would definitely not last another 10 years. At that time, he would definitely pay back the humiliation he had suffered 100-fold. Greetings, young Master Cui. Cui Yanqing raised his wine cup and repeatedly toasted the people around him. They were more or less related to the Cui family, and were also close to the king of Shu. Naturally, his status had also risen. From a certain perspective, the incident at Ningguang Fu was not completely without benefits for him. Tonight, the people at the king of Shu Wang Fu were the true upper-class people in the capital. If he could befriend one more person, he would have one more way out in the future. Cui Yanqing's gaze swept across the hall. Suddenly, his body stiffened and a look of disbelief appeared on his face. It's him. How could it be impossible? How could he be here? Cui Yanqing shook his head fiercely, and chased that unrealistic thought out of his mind. That detestable fellow was the Anxi County magistrate. He should be in Qing Prefecture now. How could he appear in the capital, and at the king of Shu's banquet? His hatred for him must be too strong, causing him to hallucinate. Cui Yanqing gulped down a mouthful of wine, and swept his gaze across the crowd again. That detestable face once again appeared in his line of sight. Pfft! He spat out all the wine that he had not swallowed in time. One of the people who passed by Cui Yanqing was lucky enough to enjoy a wine bath. He wiped his face, but before he could show his anger, he saw that the person opposite him was even angrier than him. The person strode towards the corner with large strides. What are you looking at? No matter how calm she was, she could not stand being stared at for so long. Rui turned back and glared fiercely at Li. Stingy. It's not like I'll lose a piece of flesh if I stare a few more times. Li pursed his lips. Mississippi Lou was usually cold, and gave off a mature and aloof feeling. However, she was only 17 years old. Her face was so tender and full of collagen. When he looked closely at her, he could see the tenderness under her cold exterior. He was a little curious. Logically speaking, two people who grew up in the same environment should not have such a big difference in their personalities. Rui was gentle and Wanru was gentle, while Mississippi Lou was like a tigress. How did they develop such a tigress? Out of curiosity, he had wanted to interview her. However, after careful consideration, he gave up on the idea. If she knew that he had compared her to a tigress, Li could not guarantee that he would be able to return home in one piece. Why are you here? At this moment, a voice full of suppressed anger came from the front. Li turned his head and saw Cui Yanqing, who was gnashing his teeth. It was his own embarrassment. Li looked up at him and asked, "Why can't I be here?" He felt depressed in his heart. The reason why he had a conflict with Cui Yanqing was because Cui Yanqing had bullied his friend in front of him. Cui Yanqing had copied the poem and slapped his face because he had forced him to. Why was he still biting him? People often said that meeting an old friend in a foreign land should be one of the 4 happy events in life. Even if he did not put this matter on the same level as the wedding night, He should not be so unfriendly as soon as they met, right? Although Cui Yanqin was only a small official in the king of Shu's residence, who was the king of Shu, no one dared to look down on the people around him, who knew that he would become a high-ranking official in the court in 2 years. Therefore, his every move attracted the attention of many people present. The young scholar sitting beside Li Yi was slightly startled when he saw this. Then joy appeared on his face. He knew that his opportunity had come. He stood up from his seat and pointed at Li Yi. Yes, someone like him who does not respect the king of Shu has no right to sit here. Cui Yanqin looked at him. The young man immediately said, adding oil to the fire, "Sir, you may not know, but just now." Li Yi rubbed the space between his eyebrows. The king of Shu really did not reject talented people. Take the person beside him for example. If he was a storyteller in a brothel, he would definitely have a much better future than studying. He quietly watched the young man's spittle fly. Cui Yanqin's face was gloomy. Occasionally he would look at him with eyes that seemed to be spewing fire. Several people around them had already noticed the strange situation and looked over with puzzled eyes. Chapter 378. Is that young Master Cui? Cui Yanqin was a member of the king of Shu's mansion. His actions usually represented the attitude of the king of Shu. Seeing his angry expression, the surrounding people cast curious looks at him. Young Master Cui seems to be very angry. What happened just now? I don't know. But that person looks a little strange. I've never seen him before. I didn't expect him to be qualified to attend His Highness's banquet. It seems that he and Cui Yanqin have a big grudge. But they happened to meet here. He can only blame his bad luck. The king of Shu had a wide range of friends, whether they were high officials or poor disciples. As long as they had a certain characteristic that caught the eye of His Highness, they could become guests of the king of Shu's mansion. However, in the end there were still differences in status among the guests. Having the qualifications to attend the banquet did not mean that His Highness valued him. At least, this young man who had offended Cui Yanqin had unfortunately bumped into the tip of the knife this time. While listening to the young man's spittle describing how disrespectful Li Yi was to the king of Shu, Cui Yanqin gradually calmed down. He had been so agitated just now because of his strong resentment against him. But he was very clear that this was the king of Shu's mansion. Even if he was a person of His Highness, he could not act without scruples. If Li Yi was really a guest that the king of Shu valued, he naturally could not let him do anything that would displease His Highness. Although the possibility was very small. The scholar sitting at the table next to Li Yi said with a righteous expression, "What kind of status does Her Highness have? How can he insult her? In my opinion, such a person is not fit to sit here with all of you." This place could be considered as a secluded area in the hall. So naturally, the guests were not very important. At this moment, when they heard the scholar's description, they only felt that this young man was too pedantic. Even visiting a brothel was an elegant thing for them. So what if there were a few scantily clad dancers? What did they count for? However, there were a few people who were quite disdainful of this scholar's behavior. He was a typical bootlicker who wanted to raise himself and gain His Highness's attention. He was even worse than the young man who spoke without thinking. Without waiting for Cui Yanqin to speak, a steward beside him frowned and said, "The king of Shu's residence does not welcome people who disrespect His Highness. While His Highness does not know about this, you should leave on your own." Cui Yanqin raised his eyebrows but did not stop him. According to the king of Shu's character, he would not fly into a rage just because of a few rude words. At most, he would just chase him out. Since the outcome would be the same no matter what, there was no point in him interfering. After all, he had only been by Her Highness' side for a short period of time. If he did too much, Her Highness would be displeased. However, he already knew that the other party was in the capital. The grudges between the two of them could be slowly settled in the future. The way things had developed was obviously out of Rui's expectations. Li Yi's words to change the topic had been misinterpreted by the other party. She did not know what Li Yi was thinking, but he had just said that the king of Shu was not an ordinary person. He was the future emperor of the Jing kingdom, and could not be offended. If he could befriend the king of Shu, it would be of great benefit to him in the future. Otherwise, with his lazy character, why would he attend this kind of banquet? Lu Rui frowned slightly. She wanted to step forward to explain. This was an extremely rare occurrence for her to begin with. If she was the only one who encountered such a thing, she would have left in anger. At this moment, Li stood up and patted her shoulder, saying, "Let's go." His tone was very calm and there was no expression of annoyance or indignation on his face. It was as if he was doing something that could not be more ordinary. Lu Rui looked at him, and then coldly looked around before following him out. If you knew this would happen, why did you do it in the first place? Trouble comes from the mouth. In a place like this, you should be careful with your words. That girl is a rare beauty. It would be a pity if we could get to know her. The guests at the nearby tables shook their heads and discussed for a while. They did not take it to heart. They only thought that they had to be careful with their words in the King of Shu's mansion. If they were chased out like him, it would be very embarrassing. After such a thing happened, it would be difficult for the young man to raise his head in the capital in the future. This was just a small interlude, and did not spread to more places. Everyone's attention quickly shifted to other places. The young scholar's face was filled with excitement. He felt that he had done something amazing. The only regret was that the person had actually left just like that. If he had defended himself and refused to admit it, wouldn't it have been perfect if the King of Shu was alerted? Cui Yanqin looked in the direction of the door, and a cold smile appeared on his lips. He had only humiliated him once, which was far less than the humiliation he had brought to himself. There was still a long way to go. He did not mind settling the score slowly. This remote corner near the gate would not be valued by the King of Shu, nor would it be valued by the real bigwigs. The closer the seat was to the front, the more respected it was. It was also the focus of everyone's attention. How is old master doing recently? Li Xian, the King of Shu, smiled and asked a young man of the same age beside him. The young man smiled and said, "Your Highness, thank you for your concern. Grandpa has always been healthy." The King of Shu said, "Marquis Chun has made great contributions to the Jing Kingdom. With the blessing of the country, you will definitely live a long life." There was not much courtesy between the young man and the King of Shu. The Chun family had always been on the side of the King of Shu, and they had known each other since childhood. He looked at the other person opposite him and said, "I didn't know that Qingyu had come to the capital city until today. Why didn't you inform me before?" Cui Qingyu smiled and said, "I just arrived the day before yesterday. I have been busy with other affairs these days, and didn't even have time to visit the King of Shu's mansion." After saying this, he raised the wine cup in front of him and said, "I will punish myself with a cup first." "1 cup is not enough. At least 3 cups. Another laughter came from the side and filled Cui Qingyu's cup again. "After so many years, Qingyu, you still haven't changed your bad habit." Cui Qingyu looked at the man and shook his head. He drank up the wine in his cup again. The 4 of them were chatting and laughing casually, but the people at the surrounding tables were not so relaxed. The reason was that apart from the King of Shu, the other 3 people were also very extraordinary. Chun Lijun, the eldest grandson of Marquis Qin, Cui Qingyu, the eldest grandson of the Cui family, and Qinyu, the only male heir of Marquis Qin. Any of their families could shake the whole capital city with a stomp of their feet. Chapter 379. "I'll introduce someone to you later," the King of Shu suddenly said after the 4 of them chatted for a while. Although he was a prince, he did not put on any airs in front of these 3 people. Firstly, it was because they had grown up together and had a good personal relationship. Secondly, it was because the 3 of them had strong backgrounds and were his strong supporters. Naturally, he treated them differently from others. "Oh, who is it?" Cui Qingyu was slightly surprised when he heard that. The person who could make the King of Shu introduce the 3 of them so seriously was naturally not a simple person. Otherwise, he would not have mentioned him in front of them. Chun Lijun's face also showed an expression of interest. Only the young man named Qinyu was minding his own business, and did not seem to be interested. "A very capable person," the King of Shu said with a smile. The king of Shu had been gathering talents from all over the world. Naturally, he would not let go of the son of Chang and county who was valued by his father. As early as 3 days ago, he had sent someone to send an invitation. However, he had to meet the 3 more important people today, so he did not look for him immediately. As for whether the son of Chang and county would attend the banquet, it was not within the king of Shu's consideration. He had not considered that possibility at all. Because the king of Shu kept them guessing, Cui Qingyu and Chen Lijun became even more interested in the person he was talking about. Go and invite the son of Chang and county over. The king of Shu waved to a servant behind him and said. When the servant heard this, he respectfully responded and immediately left. The son of Chang and county? Cui Qingyu was slightly stunned when he heard that. It was his first time in the capital, and he was very unfamiliar with this name. When he first heard this name, Chen Lijun was stunned. After thinking for a while, he quickly had an impression. He frowned slightly and murmured, "It's actually him?" The king of Shu looked at him and asked doubtfully, "Lijun knows him? Does he know him?" Chen Lijun nodded and said, "If there is no second son of Chang and county in the capital and the son of Chang and county that your highness mentioned also has the surname Li, then it should be him." Seeing him frown, the king of Shu paused for a moment before asking, "The county magistrate of Chang, and is indeed surnamed Li Lijun. Could it be that you have a grudge against him?" The Duke of Chen was his staunch ally, and the county magistrate of Chang, and Li Yi, was a talent that he wanted to win over with all his might. Although the latter couldn't be of much help to him in his quest for the throne, there must be a reason why his imperial father valued him so much. Since he was useful to his imperial father, then he would definitely be useful to him as well. Moreover, he was eager to know what exactly was the divine punishment that allowed the Jing kingdom to defeat the Qi kingdom, even though it was weak. Therefore, the king of Shu did not want to see any conflict between the two of them. Chen Lijun shook his head and said, "That's not it. I've never met him before, and there's no enmity between us." After saying this, he changed the topic and said, "However, the Li family and my Chen family have a long-standing grudge. The son of Chang and county is the eldest grandson of the Li family. It is not wrong to say that he has a grudge against him." This time, it was the king of Shu's turn to frown. If there was a personal grudge between Chen Lijun and Li Yi, he could mediate between them. There would always be a way to satisfy both of them. As long as there was no deep hatred between the two, the king of Shu would be able to let it go. And if there was a deep hatred between them, the county magistrate of Chang and would not have survived until now, based on Chen Lijun's character and background. What he did not expect was that this matter actually involved the house of Duke Chen. Even though he was the king of Shu, he could not completely ignore the feelings of the house of Duke Chen. Seeing the king of Shu frown, Chen Lijun smiled and said, "Your Highness, you don't have to take it to heart. After all, you have to focus on the overall situation. The grudge between our family and the Li family is just a small matter. It must not affect your Highness's important matters." Chen Lijun was naturally aware of what had happened to the Chen family recently. The emperor's attitude towards the county magistrate of Chang and was unclear. The Chen family would not anger the emperor because of a personal grudge. Although the Chen family would not do anything to him, it was hard for Chen Lijun to have a good impression of the county magistrate of Chang, and, however, to his surprise, the king of Shu seemed to think highly of this person. With this additional link, the Chen family had to let go of the old grudge. The king of Shu nodded but did not say anything else. At this time, he did not know much about the county magistrate of Chang'an. If the county magistrate of Chang'an was really capable, he had to mediate between the Chen family and the county magistrate no matter what. If Li Yi was just an undeserved reputation, he naturally would not interfere in this matter. In times of need, he would even stand on the Chen family's side. For them, there were no eternal friends or enemies. There were only eternal interests. As long as the interests were enough, enemies could also become friends. The king of Shu himself understood this principle, and so did the Chen family. At this moment, the servant who had just left came back. However, the expression on his face was a little hesitant, as if he wanted to say something. "What happened? Where is the county magistrate of Chang'an?" The king of Shu asked with a frown. Your Highness, the county magistrate of Chang, and is not here. The servant immediately replied. He didn't come tonight? The king of Shu frowned even more. Could it be that between him and Li Xian, Li Yi really chose the latter? No. The servant hurriedly explained. The county magistrate of Chang, and was here tonight, but just now, he was driven out by Steward Wu. What? The king of Shu slammed the table fiercely and stood up from his seat. The county magistrate of Chang, and was someone he attached great importance to. It could be said that among those present tonight, except for a few people, the mysterious county magistrate of Chang, and was the one he attached the most importance to. However, due to certain reasons, he did not reveal his importance in time. However, now he was actually driven out by the steward of the prince's mansion. The king of Shu was extremely annoyed. He was the only one who had attended his father's private banquet. Even the king of Shu himself had not received such an honor. How could such a person be driven out of his own banquet? When they saw the king of Shu walking to a corner with a gloomy face, the expressions of everyone in the hall immediately changed. To be honest, after coming out of the banquet, Li Yi did not feel embarrassed or disappointed at all. Instead, he felt a little happy. The banquet that he was willing to attend was the real banquet. It was better not to attend this so-called banquet that he obviously did not want to attend, but still had to go through the motions. After walking out of the king of Shu's mansion, Mississippi Lu followed behind him without saying a word. Li Yi had long been used to her silence, but he felt that this kind of silence was a little different today. At a certain moment, a cold voice suddenly came from behind. Will you offend the king of Shu if you just leave like this? Li Yi turned back to look at her and said in surprise. If I offend him, so be it. It's not a big deal. Today Mississippi Lu was a little strange. In the past, she would never ask like this. Lu Rui looked up at him and said, You said that he is the future emperor. Not yet, right? Li Yi replied. Although he did not want to offend the king of Shu, it did not mean that he could not afford to offend him. The king of Shu had potential, but at least he was not the current emperor. Taking a step back, even if he really became the emperor in the future, he had nothing to lose. If he could not survive in the Jing kingdom, couldn't he go to another country? At worst, he could go to the northwest and occupy a mountain to be a bandit. If I did not ask you that, things would not be like this, right? Lu Rui lowered her head, and her voice was no longer as cold as before. This time, Li Yi was really a little shocked. Was this what Mississippi Lu should say? He took a step forward, put his palm on her forehead and asked, You don't have a fever, do you? Lu Rui knocked his hand off. If it was in the past, she would definitely mock him. But today, she was not in the mood. She thought about it for a long time. If she had not asked that question with a sneer at the beginning, he would not have pretended to say such a joke, and things would not have become like this. However, in Willow Leaf Village, in Qing'an Prefecture, it had always been like this. They had always been getting along like this. Even she herself did not know why she liked to pick on him. However, in the face of his despicable answers, she often could not gain any advantage, and the possibility of being at a disadvantage was higher. Then, she naturally chose to hit him. This kind of life pattern had lasted for a long time. However, when did it change? From the time they came to the capital, became the magistrate of Chang and county, and had so many princes and princesses. Even a joke would be chased out of the banquet. She did not like it here. This was not the life she wanted. She did not like this kind of life. Qing'an Prefecture was so good, and Willow Leaf Village was so good. There were no princesses or princes, and there were no magistrates or magistrates. There were candied haws and rui nectar. Every day they could learn from each other, in their own yard. This was what she liked. However, could she still go back? Could he still go back with her? Seeing Mississippi Lu's blank expression, Li Yi's expression changed slightly. He finally realized that something might have happened to her. This Lu Rui made him feel very strange. This was not the Lu Rui he knew. Hey, what's wrong with you, Lu Rui? Don't scare me. Li Yi was a little nervous. He patted her face. Damn it, was there something dirty in the King of Shu's mansion? Was Mississippi Lu possessed? King of Shu. She had just said 2 words when she was interrupted by Li Yi. Nonsense, King of Shu. Even 10 kings of Shu can't compare to a hair of yours, Li Yi said impatiently. Why was she talking about the king of Shu at this time? He held her shoulder and asked, What's wrong with you? Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere? This place is not far from the palace. I'll go to the palace to find an imperial doctor. Hearing this, Lu Rui looked up at him, and her delicate body trembled slightly. Oh no, why are you trembling? Li Yi murmured. He looked even more anxious and hurriedly said, Hurry up, let's go to the palace immediately. Fortunately, I didn't forget to bring the palace entry token today. Chapter 380. Li Yi was very anxious. Mississippi Lu was really ill, and seriously ill. The Mississippi Lu he knew traveled the world with a sword. She was not afraid of anything. Not to mention the king of Shu. Even if the god of heaven came, she would fight first. She would not talk as much as she did today. I'm fine. Hearing Li Yi's words, a complicated expression flashed across Lu Rui's face. She quickly recovered and shook her head. The king of Shu was a prince after all. And he was the prince most likely to inherit the throne. No one in the world would think that he was less important than a strand of their hair. However, even so, when she heard Li Yi say that without thinking, she was still very happy in her heart. She just did not show it. Really? Li Yi looked at her suspiciously and murmured. Is it because of her period that her mood is out of order? Then he denied this guess. After being together for so long, how could he not know when Mississippi Lu's period was? Even if she was out of order, it would not be in these few days. Moreover, her symptoms were not like this at that time. She should be looking for all kinds of reasons to fight with him. You don't have to worry about the king of Shu. I have even offended the emperor. The king of Shu is nothing. Li Yi thought to himself that he had punched the emperor's chest, asked an old eunuch to have a gay relationship with the emperor, and the perfume he made almost caused the old emperor to die in advance. Which of these things was not more serious than offending the king of Shu? But he was still standing here, fine and well. Lu Rui glanced at him. Of course, she did not believe his words. However, seeing that he did not seem to care, she felt inexplicably relaxed. Don't worry. Li Yi patted her on the shoulder and said, The king of Shu is not easy to offend, but he is not the emperor yet. He does not have the final say in the capital. Even if he really becomes the emperor in the future, we can't afford to offend him, can't we? Li Yi looked confident and continued. The northwest is the border of 3 kingdoms. There are at least hundreds and thousands of mountain bandits. Not even the Qi kingdom can reach there, let alone the Jing kingdom. Don't you like being a mountain bandit? We can go there and occupy a few mountains with Fang and the others. I've even thought of the name of the stronghold. Let's call it Willow Stronghold. If you are not satisfied, we can call it Black Wind Stronghold, White Goat Stronghold, or anything else. What do you think? Isn't it good? Lu Rui stood rooted to the ground when she heard that. Moments later, her face lit up. She suddenly looked up at him and asked, Is what you said true? Do you really think so? If what I said is false, then let me. Li Yi hesitated and said, Let my family be rich and have 3 wives and 4 concubines, all of whom are beautiful maids. A few black lines appeared on Lu Rui's smooth forehead. Fortunately, she was used to it. She asked again, Don't you want to be a high-ranking official? Who said that? Li Yi looked at her angrily and said, How would you know what I'm thinking? Would I tell you that my biggest dream is to be the man of the king of mountain bandits? The king of mountain bandits? Lu Rui thought of the story of the young man named Luffy that he had told her. The great mountain road belonged to the age of mountain bandits. Was it possible? Then, as if she thought of something, she frowned and looked at him coldly. The king of mountain bandits? You? If you become the king of mountain bandits, what will I do? It was her childhood dream to be a glorious bandit like her father and grandfather. For Mississippi Lu, it was either don't do it or do it the best. If she didn't become the king of mountain bandits, then what was the point of being a bandit? No. Li shook his finger in front of her and said, You're mistaken. I'm not the king of mountain bandits. I'm the king of mountain bandits, the man. Li was still very self-aware. He knew what he was capable of. At best, he could only be a useless advisor, hiding behind the scenes and giving out ideas. As for charging and breaking through enemy lines, he was not capable of doing such a thing. However, behind every successful king of mountain bandits, there must be an excellent man. He didn't want to be the king of mountain bandits, he only wanted to be the king of mountain bandits man. Of course, no matter if it was based on strength, personal charm, or the identity of the chief of Willow Village, Rui was the best candidate to be the king of mountain bandits. As for Mississippi Lu, she could at most be the second king, or the third king. The king of mountain bandits man? Mississippi Lu was stunned. She was confused by Li Yi's words. But soon, she reacted, and a trace of anger appeared on her pretty face. She just said she wanted to be the king of mountain bandits, and he said he wanted to be the king of mountain bandits man. That meant he wanted to be her man. How dare he take advantage of her? Li looked up at Rui and saw the sneer on her face. He immediately understood and hurriedly explained, "Don't misunderstand. I'm not talking about you. You can't beat your sister, so you can't be the king of mountain bandits. At most, you can be the second king. You can't be the second king either. I'm the second king, so why don't you be the third king?" The third king? Mississippi Lu felt as if her heart was stabbed with a knife. Her face became colder, and her anger quickly turned into anger. Li Yi could already feel the murderous intent in the air around him. His heart skipped a beat. When he saw Mississippi Lu's hand subconsciously reaching for her waist, his eyelids twitched. She was going to use her weapon. However, this time was different from usual. He didn't hear the sound of a sword being unsheathed for a long time. Mississippi Lu hadn't reached the realm of soundless sword. The only explanation was that her sword wasn't with her. "Where's your sword?" Li let out a sigh of relief and immediately asked. "I think I left it in the Shu Palace." Mississippi Lu's expression changed as well. When she came out of the Shu Palace just now, her mind was filled with other things. She had completely forgotten about retrieving her sword. When the two of them turned around and walked back, Li scolded. Look at you. What should I say about you? You're already 17 or 18 years old, but you're still so careless and forgetful. It'll be hard for you to find a husband in the future." Mississippi Lu's face was frosty. She only cared about walking and didn't say a word. "Don't be so quiet. I'm doing this for your own good. Your sister usually spoils you, but this can't go on. With such a temper, how can you get married in the future? Say something." "Shut up." After Mississippi Lu spoke, Li didn't say anything. After saying so much, he felt a little thirsty. If he had known this would happen, he would have gotten a bottle of grape wine from the Shu Palace. At least it could moisten his throat now. Fortunately, his words didn't go to waste. Finally, he managed to persuade Mississippi Lu to return to her normal self. Lu Rui was the one with a frosty face who drew her sword at the slightest disagreement. Lu Rui was the one with the dream of becoming the king of bandits. Lu Rui was the one who chose to solve the problem with violence after being humiliated into anger. She wasn't the one who compromised and was chased out of the banquet while worrying about offending people. Chapter 381. After walking out of the King of Shu's mansion, the two of them had talked a lot and had walked a long way. This meant that they still had to walk for a long time before they could return to retrieve their swords. Mississippi Lu didn't stay silent. She deliberately slowed down her pace and said, "Be a bandit, I'm just saying. We're going to stay in the capital city in the future, so we can't offend the future emperor. If you have a way, it's better to make up for it as soon as possible." She didn't tell the truth this time. She had always been active rather than quiet. Whether it was traveling the martial world with a sword or becoming a bandit, it was much more interesting than staying in one place quietly. However, this was just her opinion. These days, she had learned not to force her opinion on others. "Actually, I'm really not just saying." Li curled his lips. How could he not know what Mississippi Lu was thinking? With her personality, would she stay in one place quietly? Mississippi Lu frowned. "In this peaceful world, where would we be bandits? Didn't I say it just now? In the northwest, between the high mountains and lofty ridges, the Jing Kingdom, the Qi Kingdom, and the Wu Kingdom have always been a lawless and chaotic land. There are countless bandits and horse bandits. They attack cities and rob traveling caravans. Because of the terrain, neither the Qi Kingdom nor the Jing Kingdom can send a large number of troops to encircle and suppress them. As for the Wu Kingdom, it's too busy to deal with its own internal strife. Moreover, the biggest group of bandits are the rebels of the Wu Kingdom, so they have no time to care about other things. It's a paradise for bandits. Li looked at Mississippi Lu and sighed. He said with disappointment, "How many times have I told you to read more and gain more knowledge? But you just won't listen. Look, you're stupid when it's time to use it." Lu Rui clenched her teeth. She swore that if it weren't for the fact that she didn't have autumn water with her, she would have poked a few holes in his body. However, this could be done later. There was one thing she had to confirm now. "Do you really want to be a bandit?" She didn't raise her head to look at Li Yi. She seemed to ask casually, but in her heart, there was 30% nervousness, 30% expectation, 30% joy, and a part that even she didn't know what it was. Li nodded and said, "If you are tired of this kind of life, or if you really have no way out, this is not a bad choice." "Why?" Mississippi Lu had a lot of questions today. "Because you like being a bandit." Li looked back at her and said matter-of-factly. Lu Rui had to admit that her heart was beating wildly at this moment. She was 50% nervous and 40% happy, but there was also a complicated emotion that she still didn't know what it was. "How is it?" Li Yi suddenly asked, just as she was troubled by this feeling that she had never felt before. "What? How is it?" Lu Rui lowered his head and asked in a trembling voice, which was obviously different from usual. "Are you touched by what I said?" Li Yi turned around and said to her with a smile. "Do you have a conscience? Do you want to repay me with something?" Lu Rui's body trembled again. She thought to herself that he was teasing her on purpose just now. As she breathed a sigh of relief, her embarrassment immediately turned into anger. She asked with a frosty face, "How do you repay me? For example, by marrying me?" "By marrying me?" Li looked at her from head to toe and said with a pout, "You wish. I mean, do you have any special secret techniques that you can teach me? The kind that is very powerful. That way, if I were to encounter someone like that crazy monk again, at least I would have the ability to protect myself." "In your dreams." Mississippi Lu's chest rose and fell, but she quickly regained her composure. When she opened her mouth, her voice became extremely cold. She said, "All right, I happen to have a set of powerful palm technique that is a secret of our Lu family. It has always been passed down to the female disciples and not the male disciples. I will make an exception and teach it to you now." In an instant, the wind from the palm whistled. The early spring actually had the somber feeling of late autumn. Li limped towards the direction of the Shu King's residence. It was not because of the inhumane torture that Second Miss Lu had inflicted on him, but because he had accidentally sprained his ankle when he was running away. Although it was not too serious, he still needed to limp to feel better. At this moment, the steward of the King of Shu's mansion, who had chased Li Yi and Qin Wanru out of the mansion, stood at the door with a pale face. He asked the servant who welcomed the guests, Did two people walk out of here just now?" "Yes, there were two people, a man and a woman. They are both young." The servant answered the steward's question honestly. He had been wondering why a guest had left when the birthday banquet had just begun. Now, seeing Steward Su's expression, the doubt in his heart deepened. "Left?" Hearing this, Steward Su's legs turned to jelly, and he almost fell to his knees. He knew very well that if the honored guest that the prince cared about had really left, he, who had chased him away, would have to bear the prince's wrath. That was obviously a young scholar sitting in the corner. These people would be present at every banquet in the Shu King's mansion. They did not have a strong background and were destined to not have any great achievements. They were just a group of people who wanted to climb up the Shu King's mansion, just because they could recite a few lines of poetry. As the steward of the Shu King's mansion, he had chased them away. Moreover, young Master Cui had also asked him to do so. But he had never imagined that this person was actually the honored guest of the prince, to the point that the prince would personally ask about him. But since he was the honored guest, why was he sitting in such a position? All of this was no longer important. What was important was that the honored guest of the prince had left. He had chased him away. The scholar who had falsely accused the honored guest had already been beaten out of the back door. From then on, he would never be able to raise his head in the capital again. Thinking of the scholar's ending, Steward Su seemed to have already seen his dark future. No, he no longer had a future. If the heavens could give him another chance, he would definitely sew his mouth shut. That way he would not say anything offensive and things would not have turned out this way. Finally, as if the heavens had heard his call, just as Steward Su's heart was sinking into a bottomless abyss, a somewhat familiar voice suddenly rang in his ear. To the current Steward Su, this voice was even more beautiful than the sounds of nature. "I'm here to retrieve that sword. When I entered, I left it here," Li Yi said to the servant of the Prince of Shu's residence. The servant of the Prince of Shu's residence recognized this country bumpkin, and also remembered that before he entered, he had indeed left a sword here. It was on the table behind him. He thought to himself that the person who had just walked out of the residence was him. It seemed that Steward Su had also come out for him. The servant took the sword from the table behind him and handed it over. Li lowered his head to take a look. It was indeed Mississippi Lu's sword. She was still waiting for him under the tree in front of him. Li Yi took the sword and prepared to turn to leave. Just at this moment, he suddenly felt his calf tighten. When he looked down, he discovered that his leg was being hugged. The steward who had arrogantly asked him to leave the Prince of Shu's residence was now kneeling on the ground. One hand was hugging his thigh, and the other was slapping his own face. He wailed, "Just now, I had eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. Please don't blame me. His Highness, the Prince of Shu, invites you back quickly." Chapter 382. Your Excellency, this way. Steward Su walked into the King of Shu's mansion again. As he led the way, his expression became even more humble. He bowed slightly and even felt like he had survived a disaster. The servant at the door was stunned for a moment before he thought of something. When the woman entered the king's mansion just now, she seemed to have brought that sword with her. By the time he realized it, it was already too late. The figure of the woman had already disappeared. A trace of hesitation appeared on the servant's face. After a moment, he shook his head. Since it was the honored guest of the King of Shu, there should be no problem. Moreover, the King of Shu had many experts around him. Even if there were really people with bad intentions, there was no need to worry too much. After all, Li Yi did not want to have a bad relationship with the King of Shu. Even if he did not want to be a friend, it was best not to become an enemy. When he walked back to the hall, a young man dressed in a luxurious robe with an air of nobility came out to greet him. Li Yi had seen the King of Shu once before. At this moment, he naturally recognized him at first glance. The servants in the mansion lacked discipline. I will definitely teach them a good lesson when I go down. The King of Shu smiled and went forward to welcome him. I have offended County Magistrate Li. It is I's fault. I will drink a cup of wine as punishment later. From the point of view of a prince, the King of Shu's attitude was extremely kind. He did not put on any airs and did things impeccably. Your Highness is too polite, Li Yi said with a smile. The King of Shu seemed to have completely forgotten what had just happened. He did not mention it at all. He personally welcomed Li Yi into the hall and adjusted his seat to the seat at the front. Cui Yanxin stood in a corner, his face faintly pale. He had followed the King of Shu for a period of time, but he rarely saw the King of Shu so furious. This showed that the King of Shu was very angry just now. It also showed that the position of that person in the king's mansion was far more important than he had imagined. The entire hall was much quieter than before. Some people had seen with their own eyes that the young man had been driven out by the steward of the king's mansion. However, he returned so quickly and was personally invited to the seat at the front by the King of Shu. The significance of that position was self-evident. However, there was no reason for them not to know someone who could sit in that position. However, that young man looked too unfamiliar. The King of Shu smiled and introduced to Cui Qingyu and the other two. This is Li Xianzi, whom I mentioned to you just now. Don't be fooled by his young age. Even I feel envious of father's evaluation and praise for him. After that, he introduced the three people behind him to Li Yi. Cui Qingyu nodded slightly to show that he knew Li Xianzi. Among all the people in the room, only a few people caught Cui Qingyu's attention, and this Li Xianzi was not one of them. Even a slight nod was already considered a great courtesy. When he heard the king of Shu introduce Chun Lijun, the eldest grandson of the Duke of Chun residence, a look of astonishment flashed across Li Yi's eyes. He did not expect to meet someone from the Duke of Chun residence here, and such an important person at that. He did not know what the eldest grandson of the Duke of Chun was thinking, but he actually smiled at Li Yi and nodded slightly like Cui Qingyu. This made Li Yi a little wary. This person was shrewd and not suitable to be a friend. The last young man, Qingyu, did not wait for the king of Shu to introduce him. He put his arm around Li Yi's shoulder with a smile on his face and said very enthusiastically, "Qingyu, my family situation is similar to that of the one surnamed Chun. I like you very much. You are my friend for sure." He put his arm around Li Yi's shoulder and seemed to be talking to him. However, when he spoke, his eyes were fixed on Mississippi Liu, who was behind Li Yi. Chun Lijun and Cui Qingyu looked at Qingyu in surprise. They were a little surprised by his behavior. However, when they saw the woman behind Li Xianzi, they immediately understood. Even with their status, they had seen countless beautiful women. They had to admit that the woman was indeed rare. It was no wonder that Qingyu would be so enthusiastic to a stranger. But soon after, a strange look appeared on their faces. With young Duke Qin here, he actually dared to bring his beautiful wife here. They did not know whether this Li Xianzi was smart or stupid. Seeing this, the king of Shu raised his eyebrows slightly. He knew Qinyu's character very well. Usually he did not care much about this, but this time he did not want to see such a scene. Li Yi frowned. Although it was the first time they met, he did not have a good impression of this young Duke Qin. Of course, it was not only the way he looked at Mississippi Liu, but also the way he put his arm around Li Yi's shoulder. This is sister-in-law? Qinyu's eyes flashed inexplicably. He looked at Mississippi Liu and asked Li Yi. No. Li Yi's face was expressionless as he said lightly. No. The excitement on Qinyu's face disappeared, and he looked a little disappointed. But then he smiled and said, Same. If this continued, the atmosphere would be changed by Qinyu. The king of Shu coughed lightly and said, Although Li Xianzi is young, what he has done is great for the country and the people. He is a pillar of our Jing kingdom. Because of this, my father made an exception and conferred him the title of nobility. He can be said to be the first person in the younger generation in recent years. When he said this, he did not deliberately lower his voice. So many people around heard him. Only then did the crowd realize that the person who was personally welcomed by the king of Shu was Li Xianzi, who had caused a lot of uproar in the capital recently. In recent days, many things about Li Xianzi had been mixed up, and his image had been covered with a layer of mystery in the hearts of the people. It was said that His Majesty had made an exception and conferred the title of nobility in recent years. It was said that His Majesty had not yet reached 20 years old. He wrote a good piece of calligraphy, which made Zhao Chun, the former best calligrapher of the younger generation, admit defeat. He was also well versed in Buddhism, and was a close friend of Master Tan Yin. The story of him defeating the monks of the Qi Kingdom in the Cold Mountain Temple had even been made into a play and widely spread. His background was ordinary, but his network was extremely formidable. Not to mention the crown prince of Prince Ning, who in the entire capital could have the friendship of the eldest princess. Moreover, it seemed that the king of Shu valued this person. It should be known that the king of Shu was much more important than the other two. Many people couldn't help but feel a little envious. His future was almost certain to be boundless. Even the king of Shu had shown an obvious intention to recruit him, which indicated that County Magistrate Li's meteoric rise was just around the corner. The only regret was that the beautiful Xiaonyang he brought with him was probably going to be killed by little Duke Qin. Thinking of little Duke Qin's special hobbies, the crowd could not help feeling a little pity. No matter what Li Xianzi would become in the future, he was just a county magistrate now. As far as they knew, none of the women who had caught his eye had ever escaped. Last year or the year before last, in the capital, when the wife of a marquis attended a banquet, She caught the eye of young Duke Qin and was abducted within 2 days. In the end, the matter was left unresolved. Faced with the other party's background, even the Marquis could only choose to swallow his anger, let alone an ordinary person. In this matter, there was not much difference between ordinary people and county magistrates. He just didn't know if Madman Qin would let Li Xianzi off for the sake of the king of Shu. Chapter 383. The scholarly man sitting at the head of the table was very young. He had just been driven out by the steward of the king of Shu's mansion, and had lost a lot of face. However, at this time, most people in the hall would not mock or ridicule him because of that, because the person sitting opposite him and chatting happily with him was the honorable king of Shu. The conversation between Li Yi and the king of Shu was actually not as chatting happily as most people thought. There was really nothing to talk about with the stranger. Li Yi was not in a good mood tonight. The king of Shu obviously did not have the charisma of his father. Of course, another reason might be that there were a few dishes and a bowl of plain porridge on the table. The location was not the garden of Prince Ning's mansion, and the person opposite him was not the middle-aged high-ranking official, whom Li Yi had a good impression of at their first meeting. "Your Highness, you flatter me." Li Yi had a faint smile on his face, but he kept a distance from the king. The king of Shu's intention to rope him in could not be more obvious. However, Li Yi did not expect that the way to rope him in was by praising him, saying that he was a young hero, a pillar of the country, and that if he succeeded the throne in the future, he would be heavily rewarded, saying that he was the blessing of the emperor, the blessing of the Jing kingdom, and so on. There were some words that even Li Yi himself felt a little embarrassed to hear. Perhaps the king of Shu was tired of praising and thirsty. Finally, he took a sip of tea, looked at Li Yi, and asked with a smile, "General Su said in the letter that the soldiers of the Jing kingdom are invincible on the battlefield because of Tianfa. They can kill enemies and destroy cities. I wonder what this Tianfa is. How can it be so powerful? I heard that this Tianfa was created by Li Xianzi. I wonder if Li Xianzi can answer I's doubts?" The king of Shu said with a smile, and then his eyes fell on Li Yi. "Didn't His Majesty tell the king of Shu about it?" Li Yi asked curiously. The king of Shu shook his head and said, "My father didn't mention it." Li Yi thought for a moment and quickly realized that although the name Sky Law had been circulating in the capital, it was not very popular. The higher-ups must have deliberately controlled the news in this area. However, even the king of Shu, the prince who was about to become the crown prince, did not know what heaven's punishment was. It seemed that the old emperor had kept this matter a secret to the extreme. This matter was too sensitive. Li Yi didn't want to test the old emperor's bottom line. He looked at the king of Shu and said, "The matter of heaven's punishment is not a trivial matter. Since His Majesty didn't tell Your Highness, it means that Your Highness can't know about it. Moreover, His Majesty has issued an extremely strict gag order, so..." Li Yi did not finish his words. He believed that the king of Shu would definitely understand what he meant. Sure enough, the king of Shu was startled for a moment before he immediately smiled and said, "Since father has given the order, I have been rude." The king of Shu laughed and drank the wine in his cup in one gulp. A trace of displeasure flashed across his face, which was covered by his sleeve. The son of Chang and County? Not far away, Cui Qingyu played with the empty wine cup in his hand. After glancing in a certain direction, he seemed to unconsciously murmur, "Your Highness's attitude towards him is really beyond my expectations." Chen Lijun's gaze paused there for a moment before he turned his head, and said while shaking his head, "It was just a county. Even if he had some ability, there were many capable people under the king of Shu's command." Qin Yu's gaze did not move away from that direction. He nodded and said, "It's really unexpected to meet such a woman tonight." Cui Qingyu and Chen Lijun glanced at him at the same time. With such a grandson, Prime Minister Qin's clean reputation should have been almost destroyed. He had a lot of wives and concubines in his residence, but he liked married women. As long as he liked a woman, he would use all means to get her. At that time, Qin Yu did not care about his relatives. Anyone who tried to stop him was his enemy. He even got his hands on an uncle's concubine. When that uncle went to complain to Prime Minister Qin, He was kicked out of the room by Qin Yu from then on. Madman Qin's name spread. Although he was grounded by Prime Minister Qin for 2 months, he still did whatever he wanted after he was released. Regarding this, the Qin family could do nothing about it. Because he was the only male descendant of the Qin family, in order to not let this family line end, as long as he didn't cause any scandals in the family, even Prime Minister Qin turned a blind eye to his actions. It was unknown how many memorials to impeach Qin Yu had been secretly suppressed. Chen Lijun looked at him and asked, "Aren't you only interested in married women? When did your taste change?" Hearing this, Qin Yu waved his hand and said, "I've eaten too many salty things. Occasionally, I have to change to something sweet. What do you know?" The two shook their heads and no longer cared about Qin Yu. They came to the prince's mansion tonight to discuss important matters, which represented the wishes of the family. His Majesty's attitude towards appointing a crown prince was not clear, and the joint memorials submitted by several ministers had been suppressed. A few days ago, the plan to unite with the Wang family by marriage had also failed. They did not win the support of the Wang family of Jiangyi, which was not good news for the king of Shu. In order to deal with the unexpected situation in the future, they had to make sufficient preparations. The two talked in secret for a while, and saw the king of Shu stand up and walk over. When the king of Shu sat down, Cui Qingyu looked at him and asked, "Is that person really that important? It's always good if we can win over the person that my father values." The king of Shu's face did not look very good. Just now his intention to win over Li Xianzi was very obvious, but Li Xianzi kept changing the topic. No matter what promises he made, he did not show any willingness to be loyal. He did not know how to appreciate favors. Seeing the king of Shu's face, Cui Qingyu and the other two were slightly surprised. Obviously, the king of Shu did not get the result he wanted. He was actually rejected by the other party? How could this be possible? He was the king of Shu, not the king of Wei, Qi or Jin. He was the king of Shu who was most likely to ascend to the throne. Compared to Qin Yu, he was the real lunatic. "You don't like the king of Shu?" Lu Rui sat opposite Li Yi and looked up at him. Li Yi glanced at her and said, "Of course I don't like the king of Shu. I like your sister, and I also like silver. Gold is fine too." Lu Rui did not look at him again, nor did she speak again. "We're going to be bandits in the future, so it's better not to get involved in this kind of thing." Li Yi added. He did not really like or dislike the king of Shu, but he did not want to get involved in his affairs. Since ancient times, those who got involved in such things did not end up well. Although the king of Shu was the favorite to win the championship, if he were to bet on him, he would probably get a lifetime of wealth. The opportunity that he had just turned down was something that countless people dreamed of. However, deep down Li Yi was not optimistic about the king of Shu. Although the current emperor was unwell, after several interactions with him, Shanning had inadvertently revealed, and Li Yi had sensed from this country, the seemingly kind-looking middle-aged man was wise and far-sighted. He was a very qualified emperor. How could a qualified emperor leave the position of the Eastern Palace empty when his own life was about to end? Everyone in the world thought that this position should belong to the king of Shu, and so did the king of Shu and countless courtiers. However, this position did not belong to him yet, so it would never belong to him. It was not the king of Shu's turn to be the emperor, and of course, it was not his turn to sit on the throne. Since it had nothing to do with him, he would just let it go. Of course, apart from this, there were many other reasons. For example, the king of Shu was not handsome enough, and he did not like the clothes he wore today. Also, why was he called the king of Shu instead of Wei or Qi? Calling him Prince Jin sounded better than the king of Shu. He really did not like the two words king of Shu. It was not an exaggeration at all. He could give 10,000 reasons like this. Weren't these reasons enough? Chapter 384. I'm curious. What does your highness see in Li Yi? Chen Lijun's eyes paused in a certain direction for a moment. Then he turned his head and looked at the king of Shu with some doubts. Cui Qingyu also looked up at the king of Shu. He also had doubts about this matter. If Qin Haodong only knew how to compose a few poems and write a few articles, the king of Shu wouldn't even pay much attention to him. Just because His Majesty valued him was not enough. Divine punishment, the king of Shu said in a low voice after a moment of silence. Chun Lijun and Cui Qingyu's pupils shrank slightly. They couldn't help but stand up straight. For some reason, the influence of the two words divine punishment did not spread in the capital city and was limited to some high-level officials. However, with their status, how could they not have heard of it? It was just that they didn't know the specific details of this matter. Even the elders in their families only knew that there was a heavily guarded place outside the city, which seemed to be related to divine punishment. His Majesty had firmly controlled this matter, so others knew very little about it. So what? What kind of person is Your Highness? He will know about this sooner or later. Qinyu withdrew his gaze and said, "In fact, Your Highness was a little reckless just now. Your Highness still doesn't know about this matter, which means it's not time for Your Highness to know about it. If you act too impatient, you may arouse His Majesty's dissatisfaction. Even if you really know the secret of divine punishment, you will lose more than you gain." Chun Lijun and Cui Qinyu nodded. Although Qinyu didn't do proper work, it didn't mean that he was a complete playboy. On the contrary, his insight into things was often the sharpest among them. The Qin family was not only noble. Marquis Qin was also the right chief minister, and a veteran of 3 dynasties. The king of Shu couldn't get to where he was today without the advice of the Qin family. That makes sense. The king of Shu nodded. Qinyu's words were almost exactly the same as Li Xianzi's. The most important reason he wanted to win over Li Xianzi was to get divine punishment. Now, after Qinyu's reminder, he knew that he couldn't touch it now. When he could really touch it, Li Xianzi wouldn't be of much use to him. "You guys talk first. I'll go over for a while." A mysterious smile appeared on Qinyu's face. After saying a few words to the 3 of them, he got up and walked off in a certain direction. After the king of Shu and the other 2 turned around to take a look, a strange expression appeared on their faces. Mississippi Lu did not speak. She felt a little bored sitting there. Her conversation with the king of Shu had ended on a sour note. Although she did not know if the king of Shu was a petty person who bore grudges, it was fortunate that she would not have to attend those messy banquets in the king of Shu's mansion in the future. Her time was precious and could not be wasted on these things. Just as she was thinking of an excuse to leave again, a figure suddenly appeared beside her. It was young Duke Qin. He looked at Mississippi Lu with a smile and asked, "May I know your surname, miss?" Li Yi didn't know whether he should admire his foresight or his courage. When it came to this kind of thing, Mississippi Lu never cared about the little duke or the prince. The expression on her face did not change at all because of these words. She did not even lift her eyelids. Seeing this, the smile on Qinyu's face became even brighter. He continued, "Let me introduce myself. My name is Qinyu. The current chief minister is my grandfather. I wonder if I have the honor to buy you a drink?" As expected, young Duke Qin likes that girl. What a pity, what a pity. Such a stunning beauty can't escape such a fate. That county magistrate Li really shouldn't have brought the girl here today. Doesn't he know that young Duke Qin will definitely be at the banquet of the king of Shu? Because of young Duke Qin's reputation, no one dared to say anything. Only in a remote corner far away, there were people whispering. Other than their small area, no one would be able to hear them. However, Li knew that Mississippi Lu must be able to hear it because he could vaguely hear it himself. Then he began to feel a little uncomfortable. This young Duke Qin in front of him looked well-dressed, but he was actually a beast inside. No, some of the things he did were even worse than a beast. Who knew what this beast was thinking in his heart when he was facing Miss Lu? Not to mention talking, Li felt that he was at a disadvantage even if he just glanced at Mississippi Lu. Cui Yanxin, who was standing in the corner, still had a stunned expression on his face. He did not expect that things would turn around so quickly. Young Duke Qin likes that girl? Cui Yanxin's face quickly showed an expression of extreme surprise and pleasure. Everyone in the capital city knew about the relationship between young Duke Qin and the king of Shu. In this matter, he would definitely not help the guy from Qing Prefecture. Then things would become much more interesting. If it were not for the fact that they were still at the banquet, Cui Yanxin would really want to look up to the sky and laugh. Surnamed Li, you deserve this. Steward, please inform His Royal Highness the King of Shu that we still have some matters to attend to at home. We will take our leave first. Li Yi stood up and said to the steward standing at the side. Steward Su nodded his head in shock. He looked at the young man whom he had just personally invited in and thought to himself, the King of Shu is right there. If you want to say it, go and say it yourself. However, just as he was thinking about this, the two people whom he had just invited back had already stood up from their seats and walked out of the door. The King of Shu's expression did not look too good. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, they had directly left without saying a word. Furthermore, he had personally welcomed them just now. What would the crowd think of him? However, if he stood out now, it would be making a big fuss over a minor issue. He snorted coldly and did not say anything. This lady, you won't even give me this face, will you? Just as Li Yi was about to walk out of the door, a voice suddenly came from behind him. A hand reached out from behind him and reached out to grab Mississippi Lu's shoulder. Qin Yu had a faint smile on his face. Those who were familiar with him would feel a chill run down their spines when they saw this expression. However, the smile on his face quickly disappeared. This was because before his hand could touch the woman's shoulder, a hand reached out from the side and grabbed his wrist. That person was so fast that Qin Yu did not even see it clearly. A skinny man behind Qin Yu saw it clearly. A trace of surprise appeared on his face. He moved slightly and stood behind Qin Yu. Qin Yu's smile disappeared. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Li Xianzi. He was no longer as enthusiastic as when they first met. He said indifferently, "If you don't let go of him after 3 breaths, I will chop off his hand." The skinny man behind Qin Yu nodded expressionlessly. One of his hands was already on the hilt of the saber at his waist. The King of Shu faintly heard his voice. He frowned slightly, stood up from his seat and walked out. This was the King of Shu's mansion. Qin Yu could make a scene, but he could not go too far. If Li Xianzi's hand was really chopped off here, it would be a troublesome matter for him. One reason was that it would be difficult to explain it to the emperor. Another reason was that he could not explain it to Emingzu. Even if he became the crown prince, he would not be able to get away with it. When everyone heard Qin Yu's words, they could not help but shiver. Crazy Qin was indeed Crazy Qin. This was the King of Shu's mansion. Under the watchful eyes of the public, he chopped off someone's hand and foot without saying a word. In the entire capital city, he was probably the only one who dared to do this. After saying that, Qin Yu automatically ignored Li Yi. His face regained a kind smile. He looked at the beautiful woman in front of him and said, "Gu." He only said one word before he stopped abruptly. The expression on his face was very stiff, and a trace of disbelief appeared in his eyes. This was because an ice-cold long sword was placed on his neck. This sword was very sharp. Qin Yu could even feel a line of blood being drawn on his neck. At this moment, he really felt that his life and death were only a matter of seconds. The woman looked at him with an emotionless gaze. She only said one word. Her voice seemed to come from the depths of hell, turning to ice when it touched the ground. "Get lost." That was what the woman said. Qin Yu's face was completely pale. He felt that his neck was a little wet and hot, probably because of blood flowing out. The pupils of the thin man behind him suddenly shrank. He held the hilt of his sword with one hand, but he did not have the strength to pull it out. Fast, too fast. It was a speed that exceeded his imagination. The two of them had not exchanged blows, but he already knew very well that this young woman's strength was much higher than his. This was also one of the reasons why he did not have the courage to pull out his sword. His heart was instantly filled with endless fear. With the power that she had displayed with her sword just now, it would only take a thought for her to kill the heir to the High Duke. Even His Highness the King of Shu would be in danger. If she was willing, the thin man could not help but curse in his heart. What were the people of the King of Shu doing? How could they allow such an expert to bring a weapon in? Quickly let go of the little duke. Otherwise, no matter who you are, you will not be able to bear the consequences. The thin man said in a low voice. If anything happened to the little Duke Qin, not only would the other party not be able to bear the consequences, even he himself would not be able to bear it. He and his family would all be responsible for this. Of course, if anything happened to His Highness the King of Shu, even more people would be implicated. Time seemed to stop for a moment. Lu Rui frowned, as if he was thinking about whether to put down his sword, or to kill him and then kill his way out with Li Yi. Not long after, Qin Yu and the thin man only saw a flash of white light before their eyes. The woman's sword had already been sheathed again. Interesting. Although Qin Yu's face was pale, a strange smile appeared on his face. He reached out and wiped his neck, licking the blood off his fingers with his tongue. A bloodthirsty light seemed to flash in his eyes. What's going on? From the moment Mississippi Lu drew her sword to the moment she sheathed it, only a very short time had passed. When the King of Shu walked out, he only saw the tense atmosphere outside. A dozen guards of the king's mansion surrounded the two people. The thin man behind Qin Yu looked as if he was facing a formidable enemy. As for Qin Yu, the King of Shu knew from his expression that he was about to go crazy again. Your Highness, this woman wanted to assassinate the little Duke Qin just now. A guard of the king's mansion immediately came forward and reported. This woman is extremely dangerous. Your Highness, please stay away for the time being. For them, the safety of the King of Shu was the most important. At this time, several people immediately stood in front of the King of Shu and looked warily at the woman holding the sword. The King of Shu was shocked when he saw the bloodline on Qin Yu's neck and the sword in the woman's hand. Someone actually dared to kill the eldest grandson of the Qin's mansion with a sword in the King of Shu's mansion? And this person was the woman beside Li Xianzi. The people in the hall could no longer sit still and rushed to the door. After realizing what had just happened, their faces were filled with shock. Although countless people in the capital wanted to kill Qin Yu with a sword, it was the first time that someone dared to do so. They wanted to curry favor with the King of Shu because of his current status and future potential, but it didn't mean that they had to kneel down and lick Qin Yu's boots. As for Li Xianzi and that heroine, let's call her heroine for the time being, they still had some respect in their hearts. After all, what they thought was one thing, and what they did was another. They admired Li Xianzi for having the courage to put a sword against Qin Yu's neck. After the admiration, of course, they felt pity. This kind of pity was for what they would face. They committed murder in the prince's mansion and attempted to assassinate little Duke Qin. Under the eyes of the King of Shu, if this crime was confirmed, what awaited them would be terrible things. Just as they were thinking about this, they heard a faint voice with a hint of inquiry in it. Li Yi turned his head to look at the King of Shu and asked, Your Highness, can we go now? For a moment, everyone couldn't come back to their senses. Couldn't Li Xianzi see the situation in front of him clearly? Just now, the woman put a long sword on the little Duke Qin's neck. It would be more difficult for them to leave here tonight than to ascend to heaven. The King of Shu was a little stunned at first, and then he was a little puzzled. He wondered why Li Xianzi said these words just now. Do you think it's appropriate to let you leave like this? It seemed that because of the injury on his neck, Qin Yu tilted his head. Although he was smiling, he looked quite funny. I think it's quite appropriate. Li looked at him and said. Then he looked at the King of Shu and asked, Your Highness, what do you think? The doubt and astonishment on the King of Shu's face disappeared. He suddenly realized that Li Xianzi seemed to be a little different from before. The King of Shu looked at him and said indifferently, You hurt someone in the prince's mansion with a sword. I'm afraid I can't let you leave so easily. If Li Xianzi had given him a satisfactory answer, the King of Shu wouldn't have minded intervening at this time. Qin Yu was a lunatic, but even if he was really crazy, he couldn't completely ignore the King of Shu's opinion. Unfortunately, the King of Shu didn't intend to do this for an unrelated person. He pointed to the guards of the prince's mansion and said, Men, arrest them and hand them over to the authorities. This was the capital city. Even though he was a king, he didn't have the authority to arrest people. It was fine if they did it secretly. However, under the watchful eyes of so many people, a viscount was involved. Everything had to be done according to the law. After receiving the king's order, the guards of the prince's mansion were about to step forward when they suddenly heard the sound of a sword. When they saw the woman draw her sword again, they immediately became vigilant. The King of Shu narrowed his eyes and said coldly, Do you still want to assassinate I? Chapter 385. Don't be impulsive. Even a prince has to be reasonable. Li Yi turned around, took the sword from Mississippi Lu's hand, put it back into the scabbard, and said while shaking his head, "Reasonable." Many people sighed in their hearts. They were now in the King of Shu's mansion. Li Xianzi was too naive to reason with the King of Shu and Madman Qin. Li Yi saw a certain emotion in the depths of second young Miss Lu's eyes, and thought to himself that it was fortunate that he had detected it early. Otherwise, with second young Miss Lu's personality, if it weren't for him today, whatever little Duke Qin, the King of Shu, would have had his head kicked around like a ball. Just the guards that the King of Shu's household had displayed on the surface weren't even fit to carry the shoes of Li Xian's heir's household. It would be a wonder if they could withstand a furious second young Miss Lu. Of course, he couldn't let Rui do that. After killing two bigwigs at once, it would be inconvenient for him to run away at night. Moreover, the King of Shu could be unreasonable to others, but he couldn't be unreasonable to him. At least not before the King of Shu became the emperor. Now he was no longer the man who was kidnapped by Mississippi Lu to the mountain without any human rights. Half a year's time was neither short nor long, but it was enough to change a lot of things. Sometimes, even he felt surprised. When he looked back, he realized that he had gained a lot of things. At least, he wouldn't be bullied at will anymore. Not by young Duke Qin, not by King of Shu. Li Yi put the sword back in Miss Lu's hand, turned around, looked at the King of Shu and said, "Everyone saw it clearly just now. It seems that the one who wanted to commit murder was little Duke Qin. We were just defending ourselves. I'm afraid this is not enough to assassinate him, right?" Everyone could only sigh at the naive Li Xianzi. What young Duke Qin wanted to do was one thing, and what Li Xianzi wanted to do was another. How could they be the same? Young Duke Qin had the support of the King of Shu and a grandfather who was the prime minister. What about Li Xianzi? The King of Shu said lightly, "Qin, you was just saying. He didn't really chop off your hand. However, you injured him. Even if it's not an assassination, it's still a crime." Li looked at him and asked, "Your Highness means that if someone wants to assassinate your Highness, they must first chop off one of your Highness's hands before it can be considered an assassination?" The King of Shu opened his mouth, but he couldn't find any words to refute. Then he flew into a rage out of humiliation. "How dare you?" he said coldly. "Are you threatening I?" Li Yi was a little speechless. Didn't they agree to be reasonable? Who was threatening who now? Qin Yu's neck was only scratched a little, and was no longer bleeding. He sneered and said, "Oh, you said that I wanted to commit murder first. Who saw it?" He turned around and pulled a random youth over, asking, "Did you see it?" No. The young man kept shaking his head, not daring to look Qin Yu in the eye. "Did you see that?" Qin Yu loosened his grip and pulled another one over. "No. What about you?" No. I didn't see it either." Qin Yu pulled a few people in a row, and everyone kept shaking their heads. How could they dare to go against young Duke Qin and the King of Shu? A bright smile appeared on his face, and he said, "Look, they all said they didn't see it, but you actually framed me. It seems that I have offended them even more." The few people who were dragged over by him just now couldn't help but step back, causing the people behind them to move back as well. Seeing is believing. Crazy Qin was indeed worthy of his reputation. In front of so many people he inverted black and white, but no one dared to speak the truth. Naturally, they had to stay as far away from him as possible. Li Yi noticed that there was something wrong with Mississippi Lu's aura, which was extremely abnormal for a martial arts master like her. His eyelids twitched, and he hurriedly grabbed her wrist and said, "Don't be impulsive. There are always people here who are not blind. They will give us justice." "Justice? You mean justice?" Qin Yu couldn't help laughing. Here, there was actually someone talking about justice with him? "I saw it." As if to confirm what Li Yi had just said, a voice came from somewhere. It was like a ruthless slap on Qin Yu's face. Qin Yu's laughter became softer and softer. Finally, it stopped and his face became calm. Those who knew him well knew that the smiling young Duke Qin was very scary. After laughing, The calmness of the young Duke Qin could no longer be described with the word scary. Li looked at Mississippi Lu with a little pride and said, "See, I was right, wasn't I?" If he hadn't seen Li Xian just now, he might really have rushed out with Mississippi Lu. After all, he had been a county lieutenant for so long, and he was very familiar with the law. No matter how powerful the king of Shu was, he didn't have the power to arrest people at will. Otherwise, it would be overstepping his authority, which was a big taboo. If he said he would assassinate, then he would do it. If he said he would do it, then he would do it. Did he think he was the emperor? Before becoming the crown prince and the emperor, the princes in the capital city had always been treated like pigs. So what if he was the king of Shu? Could he frame people at will? There were countless people in the capital city who were afraid of him, flattered him, and curried favor with him. But these people did not include Li Yi. Even if he became the emperor in the future, at worst he would not stay in the Jing kingdom anymore. At this time, everyone's attention was no longer on Li Yi. They were all looking for the source of the voice. They wanted to know who on earth was so bold that he didn't even give face to Madman Qin. Soon they found it. There seemed to be a figure standing behind the guards of the king of Shu's mansion who had surrounded the two people. Because they were standing in the light, it was difficult for them to see clearly in the dark. In addition, with the guards of the king of Shu's mansion blocking them, they could only vaguely see a vague shadow. They didn't know where the person came from and how long he had been standing there. But this was not important. What was important was what he had just done. "What are you?" The smile on Qin Yu's face disappeared, which meant that he was on the verge of exploding. The guards made way for him. With the help of the light, everyone saw the person, the appearance of those people. Standing in front was a young man. Even though the light wasn't too bright, it could still be seen that he was extremely handsome. Behind him stood several people who seemed to be his bodyguards. When they saw this scene, most people were stunned because they didn't know this young man. From the moment this young man appeared, the king of Shu's face was full of surprise. Cui Qingyu and Chun Lijun, who had been silent all this time, had a trace of doubt on their faces. But soon they understood and were somewhat surprised. They thought to themselves, "This is the king of Shu's mansion, why is he here?" "What are you?" The young man walked out of the darkness and walked to Qin Yu's side. As if to answer his question, he murmured, No, I'm not Dong." However, in the next moment, he did something that shocked everyone to their core. When he walked in front of Qin Yu, the young man's face suddenly darkened. He kicked Qin Yu in the stomach and sent him flying. He said angrily, "I understand you are scolding me." Bang! The force of this kick was not light. After Qin Yu flew out, he hit the pillar hard. Those who were close to him even saw him spit out a mouthful of blood. The surrounding atmosphere suddenly quieted down. Countless people widened their eyes in shock and disbelief. The person who flew out just now was young Duke Qin? Did they see it wrong? Someone actually dared to treat him like this. Who was this strange young man? Everyone said that Qin Yu was a madman. This was the real madman. Li Yi was a little envious. Sometimes, violence was the most suitable way to solve problems. The problem was, when could he be like this, no matter who the other party was, whether it was the king of Shu or the young duke, and fight without saying a word? "What are you doing?" Only then did the king of Shu recover from the shock. His face suddenly changed and he said angrily, "Li Xian, are you crazy?" Li Xian patted the hem of his robe, looked up at the king of Shu, and said calmly, "Your Highness, he is scolding me." Scolding me means scolding you and insulting His Majesty. How can your Highness have such a friend? The king of Shu was stunned, and then he felt very depressed. This was the second time he was speechless by someone. His father and Prince Ning were the legitimate children of the Empress Dowager, and their positions in the royal family were extremely important. Li Xian was the crown prince of Prince Ning, and was valued by his father. With his status, Qin Yu should not have scolded him. However, was it reasonable for him to kick Qin Yu away? Chapter 386. There were many people in the king of Shu's mansion tonight. Most of them didn't know the young man who suddenly appeared and kicked Qin Yu away. However, Some people finally recognized him after thinking for a moment. Prince Ning was far away in Qing and Prefecture and rarely appeared in the capital. Naturally, the chances of Crown Prince Li Xian appearing in public were even smaller. However, this didn't mean that he could be insulted by Qin Yu. Not to mention Qin Yu, even Prime Minister Qin wouldn't do this. Because Prince Ning was not an ordinary prince. He was the emperor's younger brother and held great power. Although he was far away in Qing and Prefecture, no one dared to underestimate him. The emperor attached great importance to him and kept him in the capital to supervise Jiangyi province. The supervisor of Jiangyi province didn't supervise the common people, but the officials, nobles, and even the royal family. This included Prime Minister Qin, the King of Shu, and many people present and their family elders. The supervisor of Jiangyi province had the right to speak directly to the emperor without going through the censorate. This supervisor had only been in the capital for a little more than a month. Normally he did not show himself, hiding in the crown prince's manor. He never attended banquets, nor did he interact with the nobles in the capital. He only did one thing when no one was prepared. He reported to the emperor that Chen Yu, the governor of the capital, had abused his power for personal gain. Thus, Chen Yu was banished thousands of miles away. Although the Chen family's power in the capital was not shaken, their years of planning were destroyed and they suffered heavy losses. The Chen family's loss was the King of Shu's loss. This was the only thing that people remembered about Crown Prince Li Xian. Now there was a second thing. He violently beat up Qin Yu, the eldest grandson of Prime Minister Qin's family, in the King of Shu's mansion because Qin Yu unknowingly scolded him. Wait a minute. Was that an insult or not? Let's not talk about this for now. After tonight, people had a new understanding of this low-key crown prince. There might be another madman in the capital. A madman crazier than Qin Yu. Madmen weren't scary. What was scary was a madman with a strong background. This crown prince's background was obviously much stronger than Qin Yu's. Ahem, haha. A light cough broke the silence. Qin Yu crawled up from the ground with difficulty, clutching his lower abdomen. Perhaps it was because of the severe pain, but his expression was somewhat hideous. He was smiling, although the expression on his face was a little twisted, and there was even a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. Everyone could feel that he was smiling. How could he still laugh at a time like this? What kind of lunatics were these? Very soon, they seemed to have thought of something. Just now, it seemed that in a situation that was even more severe than the one they were facing now, there was also someone who was smiling, and his smile was much more beautiful than young Duke Qin's. They looked at Li Xianzi and felt that everyone was acting strangely tonight. Cough, so it's, Your Highness. Qin Yu coughed a few more times and coughed out some blood. His face was full of smiles, but it looked very strange. Li Xian looked very surprised. He walked in front of Qin Yu and said, So it's young Duke Qin. I was really impolite just now. If I knew the person who scolded me was young Duke Qin, I would have used less strength. Qin Yu bowed slightly and said with a smile, In that case, I have to thank Your Highness. The crowd didn't understand what they were talking about. They really didn't understand these big shots. Obviously, they had been beaten to the point of vomiting blood, but they still had to thank the other side, while the other side accepted it calmly. What was wrong with this world? At this time, the development of the matter had completely exceeded their expectations. It didn't matter whether it was an assassination or a murder. It didn't matter whether Li Xianzi could leave the King of Shu's mansion safely. These things all became secondary because of young Duke Qin's kick. Now, apart from young Duke Qin and Prince Ning's heir Li Xian, the only one who could participate in this matter was King of Shu. In fact, King of Shu was also very troubled. Of course, it was impossible to catch Li Xian. If he detained Li Xian tonight because of this matter, he would become the laughingstock of the whole capital city tomorrow. No matter how much they didn't get along, Qin Yu was an outsider here after all. More importantly, he was in the wrong. But if he ignored it, how could he explain to Qin Yu? The Qin family and he had been in the same boat for a long time. How could he disappoint the Qin family? He knew better than anyone why Li Xian appeared here tonight, and why he attacked Qin Yu. It turned out that he had underestimated Li Xianzi. His relationship with Li Xian was far more than ordinary friends. In this way, the reason why Qin Yu refused his invitation just now was probably because of Li Xian. Qin Yu made an unintentional mistake just now. He has received the punishment he deserves. This matter is over. King of Shu said with a sullen face. The county magistrate of Chang, and Li Yi, brought a female assassin into the king's mansion to assassinate young Duke Qin. He has evil intentions. He will be temporarily detained by the king of Shu's mansion and handed over to the Ministry of Justice tomorrow. If Li Xian hadn't appeared, he might not have made such a fuss. But his appearance made King of Shu make up his mind to directly determine this matter as an assassination. Since Li Xian made him uncomfortable, he naturally wouldn't let him feel comfortable. Li Yi's eyes flickered slightly. It would be strange if a person like King of Shu could become the emperor. He was so narrow-minded. It was him who invited him here. Just now he said that he would have a bright future if he followed him. Now he turned his back on him. The old emperor must be blind to pass the throne to him. If King of Shu could bear it at this time, he would really be careful. But in order to punish him, King of Shu was so eager, so the danger was naturally much less. Assassinate Qin Yu? Temporarily detain the King of Shu's mansion? A smile appeared on Li Xian's face. He looked at King of Shu and asked, Your Highness, who gave you this power? His Majesty or yourself? As soon as Li Xian said this, King of Shu's face immediately changed and became completely gloomy. The hearts of the people around also trembled. His Highness had completely fallen out with King of Shu. Just because of Li Xianzi? Was it worth it? Although King of Shu was a prince, he could do whatever he wanted in his own fief, which was far away from the emperor. But this was the capital city. Strictly speaking, King of Shu, who was already an adult, should have gone back to his fief long ago. In the capital city, although everyone had to salute him and call him, Your Highness. In fact, he could only use this title. He had no real power, because he was not the crown prince, let alone the emperor. Of course, because King of Shu had a strong background and was very likely to ascend the throne. No one in the capital city dared to talk to him like this. They could not wait to flatter him. Even if he was fine and overstepped his power, no one would care. But if this matter was brought to the table, King of Shu would not be in the right even if it was brought to His Majesty. Because the person who said that was Crown Prince Li Xian, the supervisor of Jiangyi province, the supervisor of King of Shu. Moreover, even a blind man could tell what was going on tonight. If the crown prince, as the supervisor, intervened, the King of Shu and Little Duke Qin would no longer be in the hands of the King of Shu and Little Duke Qin. The reputation that the King of Shu had accumulated over a long period of time would also be smeared with a big stain. After Crown Prince tore off this fig leaf, King of Shu had been forced into a desperate situation. Chapter 387. Who gave you this authority? Was it His Majesty or yourself? The King of Shu realized sadly that he was speechless at Li Xian's words. His father had never said such a thing. As for himself, of course, he was not qualified to do so. Li Xian's words struck the King of Shu's heart. No matter how the King of Shu answered, he would be in the wrong. Li Xian's words even tore off the King of Shu's mask, making him feel as though he was exposed in front of everyone. He was a prince, yes, but this was the capital. It was precisely because he was a prince, an adult prince, that he could not do as he pleased. It was just that no one had pointed this out. No one was willing to offend him. Everyone he came into contact with was flattering him and bootlicking him. However, no one was willing to offend him, but it did not mean that no one was willing to offend him. The King of Shu's face was indescribably gloomy. He could no longer maintain his deliberate calmness. He and Li Xian did not see eye to eye. This had been a fact since they were young. However, it was the first time they had completely fallen out like this. He chose to completely fall out with her for someone who wasn't that important to him. The King of Shu was angry, surprised, and puzzled. He did not understand. Did Li Xian really not care at all? Did he not care about the fact that he would become the emperor in the future? The King of Shu did not know that if Li Xian knew of his thoughts, he would probably be met with another wave of mockery. He would not care so much. He only knew that when the king of Shu really ascended to the throne, he would no longer have such a chance. The atmosphere in the hall was strange to the point of freezing. Everyone, including Cui Qingyu, Chun Lijun, and even Qin Yu and Madman Qin, were silent. Most people did not even dare to breathe loudly. Now that things had developed to this point, it was no longer something they could intervene in. If your highness has nothing else, we will leave first. The first to break the silence was Li Xian. He first smiled at the king of Shu, then turned his head, put his arm around Li Yi's shoulder and walked out. The king of Shu did not say a word and Qin Yu was expressionless. The guards of the king of Shu's residence did not stop them, and consciously made way for them. How did this happen? Li Xian let go of Li Yi's shoulder, and asked in astonishment before they walked out of the king of Shu's mansion. Before Li Yi could answer, he seemed to have thought of something, and a look of understanding appeared on his face. He glanced at Mississippi Lu and said, I know, so it's because of that lunatic Qin Yu. But doesn't he always like married women? How could he? Li found it hard to associate this chatterbox beside him with the domineering crown prince just now. He shook his head and asked, Why are you here? I'm here to see if you will stir up any trouble in the king of Shu's residence. Li Xian looked as if he had great foresight and said, If I had come a little later, you wouldn't have killed the king of Shu and Madman Qin, right? I didn't want to kill the king of Shu, Mississippi Lu said lightly. For some reason, Li Xian only felt as if a cold wind was blowing around him. He didn't want to kill the king of Shu. He had to thank Madman Qin because he saved his life. The king of Shu recruited you? Li Xian suddenly asked. Li nodded. You didn't agree? Li Xian asked again. Li glanced at him. Wasn't it obvious? If he had agreed to the king of Shu, what happened just now would not have happened. Li Xian felt inexplicably happy. He had a lot of happy things these 2 days. He asked casually, Why? Don't you know that he is the prince most likely to inherit the throne? Then why did you still fall out with him? Li Yi asked back. Because I don't like him, Li Xian said matter-of-factly. I don't like him either. Why? Because he is ugly. When sitting in the carriage on the way back to the crown prince's residence, Li Xian was still thinking about the question just now. The king of Shu is not ugly, he said to himself. Then he nodded and said, Of course he is far inferior to me. Compared to that guy, he is also a little inferior. A mysterious smile appeared on his face. Then he opened the curtain and said, Lu Yang, hurry up. What are you waiting for? The guard driving the carriage smiled bitterly. Your Highness, this is already fast enough. We can reach the crown prince's residence in 15 minutes at most. His Highness had been acting strangely these 2 days. In the past, when he returned to the residence, he would delay as long as he could. Now he wished he could grow a pair of wings and fly back. The king of Shu's residence was not far from the city gate. When Li Yi arrived, there were many carriages coming in and out. There was a long queue of carriages entering the city. He asked the carriage to stop outside the city. The crown prince's residence was in a different direction. After rejecting Li Xian's offer to send them, he naturally had to walk over with Mississippi Lu. He was limping, and the way he walked was a little strange. He did not feel anything when he was in the king of Shu's residence, but now it had somehow gotten worse. He thought that he would let Rui massage it when he returned. It should be fine the next morning, and he would not delay his trip to the palace. Take it. Mississippi Lu stopped, turned around, and suddenly threw the sword in her hand to him. Li Yi caught it and asked, What is it? Mississippi Lu squatted down slightly and said, Come on up. It's okay. I can walk on my own. Li Yi shook his head and said, Dawdle. She seemed to be a little impatient and walked straight over. Don't be so wishy-washy. The city gate is about to close. Li Yi held the sword called Autumn Water in his hand. A faint fragrance lingered in his nose. He thought to himself that there would be a day when he would be carried by a woman. Moreover, it was Mississippi Lu. Thinking back to half a year ago, she was still riding on a horse with a proud expression. Now, it was really like a dream. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. 2 voices rang out at the same time. Mississippi Lu stopped for a moment, and then continued to move forward. There was a long silence again, and the atmosphere was a little awkward. You first. You first. The atmosphere was awkward for a while. I'm sorry to have made you suffer tonight, Li Yi said apologetically. She was Lu Rui. There was only one Lu Rui in the world, the heroine Lu Rui, who was quick to repay kindness and revenge. Rui had doted on her since she was a child, and refused to let her suffer the slightest grievance. This was also the main reason why she had such a character. Who was the king of Shu? Who was the young Duke Qin? There should be nothing in the world, and no one could make her feel wronged, including himself. However, it was because of him that she had to be restrained by many things. There's nothing to be sorry about. I shouldn't have been so impulsive. After all, this is the capital. Mississippi Lu said after a moment of silence. You have nothing to be sorry about. Because I was going to do the same. We can't just obediently stretch out our hands when others want to cut off our hands, right? And then? Let's kill our way out. They can't stop us. They can't stop me. What's yours and mine is the same. What's divine punishment? You've seen it that night in Willow Village. How did you do it? Do you want to learn it? Yes. You should have told me earlier. How would I know if you didn't tell me? If you had asked earlier, I would have taught you. There's no need to be polite between us. Do you really want to learn it? Plop. Li got up from the ground. Looking at Lu Rui's back, he limped and chased after her. Don't go. Don't you want to learn it? How can I teach you if you leave? The king of Shu's mansion. After what happened just now, the banquet couldn't continue tonight. The king of Shu had completely lost face in front of everyone. His face was extremely gloomy. The rest of the people didn't say a word, and didn't even dare to breathe heavily. It was not until now that the king of Shu realized that he hadn't paid enough attention to Li Xianzi from the beginning to the end. Li Xian's falling out with him made him deeply aware of this fact. He just didn't know what kind of position Li Xianzi had in his father's heart. But no matter what, his actions tonight had completely pushed Li Xianzi to the opposite side. Because of this, Qin Yu would definitely hold a grudge against him. The king of Shu hadn't done something like this for a long time. Standing behind him, Chun Lijun and Cui Qingyu still had shock and astonishment on their faces. For them, this was a trivial matter that Qin Yu could solve alone. Who would have thought that the situation would suddenly take a turn for the worse, and even the king of Shu would be involved? The result of this matter was far beyond their expectations. As the supervisor, Crown Prince Li Xian had actually fallen out with the king of Shu in front of so many people. From their point of view, this matter was simply incomprehensible. I'll go back first. Qin Yu's expression was calm. It was hard to tell whether he was happy or angry. After saying that, he left with his men. This strange silence didn't last long. Everyone scrambled to take their leave. Naturally, they didn't dare to mention what had just happened. The king of Shu and Qin Yu looked very calm on the surface. But those with discerning eyes knew that after tonight, there would probably be a big storm in the capital city. The focus of the storm was, of course, Li Xianzi, who had just shown his outstanding talent. It was just unknown whether the crown prince could continue to protect him under the wrath of the king of Shu and little Duke Qin. Late at night, the entire capital city was gradually shrouded in darkness and silence. Most of the lights in the imperial city were extinguished. Only rows of patrolling guards with lanterns occasionally passed by. At this time, in the depths of the palace, there were still lights swaying in a palace, and the sound of pages turning could be heard from time to time. A ghostly figure suddenly appeared outside the Hall of Diligent Government. Chief Chamberlain Changde glanced at the eunuchs who had begun to doze off outside the hall. He coughed lightly, and the two immediately woke up. Seeing the figure standing in front of them, their faces immediately turned pale. Just as they were about to salute, Changde waved his hand, gently pushed open the hall door, and floated in. Inside the Hall of Diligent Government, Emperor Jing was reviewing memorials at the innermost table. Hearing the sound coming from inside the hall, Emperor Jing looked up and casually asked, "What time is it now?" "Your Majesty, it's just past midnight. It's so late." Although Emperor Jing said so, he covered his mouth and coughed a few times. Then he continued to review. Changde hesitated for a moment and said, "Your Majesty, it's getting late." Li Xianzi once said that Your Majesty shouldn't be too tired. For the sake of the world, Your Majesty, please go to bed early. It's been so many years. 1 or 2 more days won't make a difference, Emperor Jing said indifferently. A wry smile appeared on Changde's face. His Majesty had said this for several years, but every time, he just said it casually. Speaking of Li Xianzi, Emperor Jing put down his pen, rubbed his wrist and said, "Did he attend the banquet invited by the King of Shu tonight?" Changde nodded and said, "About the banquet invited by the King of Shu today, I have something to report to Your Majesty." "Tell me, what kind of trouble did my county magistrate Li cause?" Jing Emperor smiled, got up and stretched, walked down and said, "Your Majesty is wise." Changde was stunned for a moment, and then said with great admiration. Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "What wise? He and Xian are good friends. Li Xian wanted to win him over, but he chose the wrong person. One is arrogant, and the other is stingy. If they didn't cause any trouble, I would be surprised." Hearing this, Changde smiled and stopped thinking about it. He told Emperor Jing everything that happened in the mansion of the King of Shu tonight. If the King of Shu or Li Yi were present, they would probably be shocked by Changde's words. This was because his description of tonight's events was extremely detailed. It was as though he was personally present at the scene. Even the details that Li Yi and the King of Shu did not notice were not left out by him. Xian was there. Emperor Jing habitually touched the short beard on his chin and asked, "Did Li Xianzi do anything before Xian went to the mansion of the King of Shu?" Changde shook his head and said, "According to the spy, Li Xianzi should be afraid of the Qin family and the King of Shu, so he didn't do anything special tonight. Qin Yu wanted to cut off Li Xianzi's hand, but Li Xianzi didn't do anything. But the second Miss Lu almost cut Qin Yu with a sword. When the King of Shu wanted to arrest them, Li Xianzi happened to arrive." "Afraid of the Qin family and the King of Shu?" Emperor Jing shook his head and said, "I'm afraid that only those who died in the Willow Leaf Village know that the Qin family and the King of Shu are not enough to make him afraid. He didn't do anything, but he was waiting for me to do something." Changde's face showed a trace of doubt. Although he had been with His Majesty for decades, he still couldn't guess some of the Emperor's thoughts. "Forget it. He is so generous to me, so I can't be stingy to him. It's good to let him make a mess in this lifeless capital city." Emperor Jing stood in front of the palace door with his hands clasped behind his back. Looking at the stars in the sky, he showed a smile that even Changde couldn't understand. Chapter 388. With such a son, why should the Qin family worry about not perishing? Emperor Jing did not continue to read the memorials. After writing a few edicts, he went to the Empress' bedroom to rest. Changde stood at the door of the Hall of Diligent Government, playing with a token in his hand. Thinking of the contents of the edicts, a rare sneer appeared on his old face. The great victory in the battle with the Qi kingdom, and the capture of the city was a great achievement that the former emperor, and even Emperor Taizu had not completed. Now the emperor's prestige among the officials had reached its peak. Recently, the various edicts issued, and the voices of opposition in the court had almost disappeared. Make a fuss. It's a pool of stagnant water, but there are many undercurrents. However, it's good to make a fuss. After a moment, he put away the wooden token in his hand and murmured. His figure quickly disappeared into the dark palace. When he woke up, Li Yi could hardly feel the pain in his ankle. He also had a stream of zhenqi that second granduncle had poured into his body. Although it was almost useless against masters, his body was indeed much better than before. Besides the zhenqi massage from Rui, it was also related to his gradually improving self-healing ability, that he could jump up and down so quickly. As usual, he had to go to the palace to teach. Now that the time of the prince and princess's mathematics class was arranged by him, he naturally did not need to get up so early. When he went out, Rui helped him tidy up his collar and warned him, "My husband, you have to be careful these 2 days. Don't walk or run. Although you didn't hurt your muscles or bones, you still need 2 days to recover." While no one was paying attention, Li secretly kissed her on the cheek and said, "I know." Rui was thin-skinned and blushed, but she did not avoid it. Behind Li Yi, the little servant girl made a "nah" sound. She was about to come in, but she covered her face and ran out. Mississippi Lu was already waiting for him in the carriage outside. When Li Yi walked out and was about to get on the carriage, several figures came from not far away. Seeing the people walking over, Li Yi's expression froze for a moment, then a hint of joy appeared on his face as he said, "Why are you here?" Lu Yichang, who was dressed in a yamen uniform, was also pleasantly surprised. He walked over and said somewhat bewilderedly, "Sir, it's really you. When did you come to the capital?" Li looked at him and asked with a smile. When he was in Qing and Fu, it was because of Lu Yi that he could be at ease as a lazy county magistrate. This guy was born to be a bailiff. Even Li Yi had no choice but to accept his abilities. "Just arrived 2 days ago." Lu Yi smiled and said, "Sir Lu has been transferred to Jingdo and has brought me with him. I originally wanted to pay a visit to you, but I didn't expect to see you so soon." County Magistrate Lu has been transferred to the capital. Li Yi was a bit surprised to hear this. Although Qing and Fu was also an important town in the Jing Kingdom, it was still inferior to Jingdo. Under normal circumstances, being transferred from Qing and Fu to the center of power in the Jing Kingdom was a promotion. Even County Magistrate Lu would be transferred to Jingdo one day? This time, without waiting for Lu Yichang to reply, a middle-aged man dressed in a scarlet official's uniform came forward and said with a smile, "Greetings, County Magistrate Li." He didn't introduce his official position because it wasn't the first time the two had met. When Li Yi went to deal with the matter of the crazy monk, he saw him at the yamen. At that time, this person stood beside the magistrate and seemed to be a county magistrate. "What business does County Magistrate Sun have here?" Li looked at him and asked. The middle-aged man laughed and said, "Marquis Qin's Fu sent someone to the yamen this morning to report that young Duke Qin was injured by an assassin yesterday. I was ordered to come here to investigate." County Magistrate Chen had a smile on his face, but he was secretly bitter in his heart. It wasn't good to let him, a county magistrate, deal with the matter of Prime Minister Qin's Fu and Viscount's Fu. No matter which side he offended, it wouldn't be good. However, it was very clear that offending County Magistrate Li was much wiser than offending Prime Minister Qin. Li thought that crazy Qin moved fast. An official came early in the morning. He wasn't even willing to wait for half a day. The king of Shu didn't have the power to detain people, but the yamen of Jingdo had the power. Moreover, this county magistrate's attitude was very good and friendly. He looked like he was doing things according to the law, but he still maintained etiquette. People who could get to this position were indeed not ordinary people. Hearing this, Mississippi Lu jumped down from the carriage and stood beside Li Yi. Lu Yichang opened his mouth but didn't know what to say. This was his first time handling a case, but he didn't expect to find County Magistrate Li lordly. There was no doubt that without lordly, there would be no Lu Yichang today. However, today it was the county magistrate who was in charge, so he couldn't get a word in. At this time, he was in a bit of a dilemma. County Magistrate Sun smiled and said, "County Magistrate Li and the girl only need to go to the county government with me. The right and wrong will be decided by themselves. I will also act according to the law. I hope County Magistrate Li won't be embarrassed." County Magistrate Sun's duty was to take them back. As for what would happen later, it was County Magistrate Lu's headache. The people of Marquis Qin's Fu were waiting in the county government. This first case was probably enough to make County Magistrate Lu, who suddenly appeared out of nowhere, suffer a lot. Li Yi smiled and said, "Sorry, I have to go to the palace now. I'm afraid I can't go back with County Magistrate Sunday. You go back first. After I come out of the palace, I will go directly to the county government." There was a prime minister in Qin's mansion. If he went to the county government, they could do whatever they wanted. He was not so stupid. What's more, the thing he was waiting for hadn't come yet. Although he didn't know whether it would come or not, he had different preparations. But he didn't prepare to go to the county government with County Magistrate Sunday. County Magistrate Sun was in a bit of a dilemma, because he didn't know why County Magistrate Li went to the palace. However, he couldn't afford to delay anything in the palace. But if he didn't take the girl back, how could he explain to the people of Qin's mansion? County Magistrate Li this. When County Magistrate Sun was hesitating, a sound of hooves came from the front, which interrupted the struggle in his mind. A gorgeous carriage stopped in front of the Viscount's mansion, and there were several people riding on horses in front. The leader was an old man with wrinkles all over his face. Several people behind him were also wearing brocade robes. They looked middle-aged with fair faces and no beard. County Magistrate Sun could tell at a glance that they should be the servants of the palace. Li also saw it. He saw what he was waiting for, or rather, the person. The leading old man got off the horse and walked to Li. He said expressionlessly, "According to His Majesty's order, I'm here to take County Magistrate Li to the palace." County Magistrate Sun's eyelids twitched. According to His Majesty's order? His Majesty sent a servant to take him to the palace. It seemed that today's matter was destined to not go smoothly. The man was an old acquaintance. Li walked over and looked at Changda. He said, "Supervisor Chang, why does His Majesty want to see me?" County Magistrate Sun's eyelids twitched again. "Why does His Majesty want to see you? Is this something you should ask?" He began to be confused about County Magistrate Li's position in His Majesty's heart. He couldn't offend Qin's mansion, but could he offend His Majesty? Changda still said expressionlessly, "You'll know when you get there." After that, he took out a plate from his pocket and threw it to Li. He said, "Put this away and get in the carriage." Looking at the plate in his hand, Li asked in confusion, "What's this?" There were many rules and plates in the capital. Viscounts had plates that represented their identities. Entering the palace had plates that allowed people to enter the palace. Everything had to be done with plates. It seemed that it was very popular to give plates to the emperor and monks. The problem was that he didn't know what these plates were for. Although Li didn't know the plate in his hand, it didn't mean that County Magistrate Sun didn't know it. In fact, even if the County Magistrate didn't know it, it was impossible for him not to know it. Seeing this plate, he felt his legs go weak and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. Was Qin's mansion crazy? How could they send him to arrest County Magistrate Li? With this plate, except for His Majesty, who had the power to arrest him. This was the plate of the Secret Intelligence Office. The Secret Intelligence Office was a special department directly under His Majesty, and only answered to His Majesty. It had always been them who arrested people. How could others arrest them? It was fine if they were targeted by the censors. At most, they would argue with them. But if they were targeted by the Secret Intelligence Office, they would have no way out. Thinking of these things, County Magistrate Sun felt his legs go even weaker. It took him a lot of effort to steady himself. He had already cursed the steward of Qin's mansion in his heart. Changda said lightly, "This is the plate of the Secret Intelligence Office. From today on, you only need to listen to His Majesty's orders. Apart from that, you don't need to care about anything else." Hearing this, Li's eyes lit up. He suddenly felt that the simple and unadorned plate in his hand had become dazzling. Only need to listen to the old emperor's orders. Didn't that mean that with this plate, he could do whatever he wanted in the capital? Good stuff, good stuff. Seeing that Li was still standing there, Changda urged, "Let's go." Li nodded. Just as he was about to get into the more luxurious carriage, he suddenly seemed to remember something. He turned back, looked at County Magistrate Sun, and asked, "County Magistrate Sun, what did you want to say just now?" "I wanted to say." County Magistrate Sun's forehead was already covered with a thin layer of sweat, but he didn't even dare to wipe it. With a straight face he said, "I wanted to say that the monks that County Magistrate Li asked us to track last time have been found. They are all monks from the Qi Kingdom. Although they have already escaped the capital, the Ministry of Justice has already issued an arrest warrant. County Magistrate Li, please rest assured. As soon as there is news of them, I will immediately send someone to inform you. Then I'll have to trouble you." County Magistrate Sunday, Li gave him a meaningful smile, and got into the carriage from the palace with Mississippi Lu. Seeing the carriage go far away and the eunuchs on horseback also disappear before his eyes, County Magistrate Sun let out a long sigh of relief. His heart finally relaxed. "Go back." he said angrily. Damn steward of Qin's mansion. Why didn't he tell me that County Magistrate Li was from the intelligence office? Didn't he send me to die? A bailiff asked in confusion. Your Excellency, aren't we here to catch the assassins? Where are the assassins? County Magistrate Sun was angry when he didn't say it. He immediately turned around and gave the bailiff a hard kick on his butt. Catch the assassins? Catch your mother. The bailiff didn't dare to dodge. He said pitifully, Your Excellency, my mother passed away 2 years ago. How dare you talk back? Seeing this scene, a smile appeared on Lu Yi's face. No matter where he was, the county magistrate was still the former county magistrate. The carriage stopped in front of the palace gate. Li Yi turned to Mississippi Lu and said, I don't know when I can come out. Go take a walk on the street and wait for me here in 4 hours. Changde reminded him. The token that His Majesty gave you to enter the palace allows you to bring 2 people with you. Ah. Li Yi was stunned. He looked at the old eunuch and said, Why didn't you say so earlier? He looked back at Mississippi Lu and said, Then let's go to the palace together. I can show you what the palace looks like. Changde said expressionlessly, She can only accompany you in. She can't wander around, and you can't either. You talk too much. Li Yi thought to himself. This old eunuch doesn't usually talk so much. Why didn't he stop talking today? Mississippi Lu still carried her sword with her, but even the general had to take off his armor when entering the palace. She could only leave her sword at the palace gate. Before Li Yi went to Bowen Hall, he had to see the old emperor first. Changde led the way while he and Mississippi Lu walked behind. Speaking of which, half of the experts in the world are in the palace. In the palace, any old eunuch you meet could be a peerless expert. Don't run around later. Li Yi reminded Mississippi Lu. This time, Rui didn't refute Li Yi. She had never been to the palace before and never thought that she would have the chance to come here. She looked at the palace walls on both sides and the palace in the distance with interest. For example, Steward Chang. Although he doesn't know the sunflower manual, he's definitely very good at martial arts. It's just that he's a little old. If he's willing, you can find him later to exchange a few moves. But remember to go easy on him. After all, the old man's body is weak. Li Yi knew that Mississippi Lu was a battle maniac, but in reality, it was rare to find someone who was on par with her. He was too weak, and Rui was too strong. Neither of them were suitable opponents. There must be a lot of experts in the palace. It should be enough for her to have a few good fights. No. Mississippi Lu didn't even look at the old man and said straightforwardly. Why? Li Yi was a little confused. He had seen Changde's skills. He should be quite good. Could it be that Mississippi Lu didn't want to bully the old man? I can't beat him. Mississippi Lu's answer was also very straightforward. This time Li Yi was really surprised. To be able to make the proud Mississippi Lu admit that she was inferior to him. This old eunuch seemed to be much stronger than he had imagined. He looked up at Changde. No wonder he was the steward of the inner attendants. He was always by the old emperor's side. The old man was still as strong as before. My body is weak? Hearing Li Yi's words, the old man who was walking in front curled his lips. In his opinion, Li Yi's martial arts were not worth mentioning at all. On the other hand, the little girl beside him was really talented. At such a young age, she had already reached such a high realm. He had seen too many talented people in his life, but only Her Royal Highness could be mentioned in the same breath as her. In Li Yi's opinion, Mississippi Lu was already an expert of experts that he would never be able to surpass in his lifetime. He didn't expect this old eunuch to be even more powerful. It seemed that since ancient times, the saying that experts came out of the palace was not wrong at all. The fire of gossip began to burn in his heart. Just as he was about to ask Steward Chang if he knew the sunflower manual, he suddenly felt something and looked up at a palace in front of him. At a glance, he saw that there were dozens of figures slowly walking out of the palace that was more than twice the size of the palaces around it. Chapter 389. Court is about to end. Let's go this way. The old eunuch Changde glanced at the crowd in front of him. After crossing a stone bridge, he bypassed them and chose another path on the left. He entered the palace just in time to end court. Were the people walking toward him the civil and military officials of the Jing kingdom? Walking out of the palace door, the crowd was bustling. Li glanced around and did not see anyone familiar. The one walking in the front is Prime Minister Qin. Changde did not turn around but suddenly said lightly. Li was not unfamiliar with the words Prime Minister Qin. Hearing this, he turned around and saw an old man walking in the front. Because of the distance, he could not see his face clearly. Even though they had not met, Li did not have a good impression of this Prime Minister Qin. Not to mention how good he was in politics, he had taught Qin Yu such a grandson. How good could he be? After passing through a palace wall, he could no longer see the scene of the officials leaving court. Li also put this matter to the back of his mind. Mississippi Lu was waiting in Bowen Hall, while Changde took him to see Emperor Jing. At this time, the officials who had not yet walked out of the palace door were gathered in twos and threes, discussing something in low voices. Is His Majesty finally dissatisfied with Prime Minister Qin? The Minister of State Affairs has not heard anything. It was His Majesty who personally issued the edict. It seems that His Majesty deliberately bypassed Prime Minister Qin. Recently, His Majesty's thoughts are becoming more and more difficult to guess. The appointment of the heir has been delayed again and again. Now he wants to weaken the Qin family. Could it be that the King of Shu is not a prince that His Majesty likes? His Majesty still wants to. Be careful with your words. When the topic of conversation turned to certain matters, the crowd realized that this was not something they could discuss in private. They hurriedly stopped talking and looked around. Seeing that no one was paying attention, they quickened their steps and walked out of the palace. The edicts that His Majesty had just issued in court had become the only thing on their minds. For no reason, an important figure of the Qin family in the Hall of Governmental Affairs had been moved out of the center of power. Although his rank did not change, the meaning he represented was different. How could an empty position compare to a renunciate of the Hall of Governmental Affairs, who could directly participate in political affairs? But this was not all. Several of Prime Minister Qin's students in the capital, who had a close relationship with the Qin family, were also affected to varying degrees. What should have been a bright and boundless future suddenly became uncertain. In addition, there were also some large and small transfers. Without exception, they were all related to the officials of Prime Minister Qin's faction. When these matters were put together, the meaning behind it was very thought-provoking. Was His Majesty finally going to make a move against the group of civil officials, led by Prime Minister Qin? For many years, many of His Majesty's decrees had been strongly opposed by these conservative factions. For the stability of the court, His Majesty would often choose to give in. Could it be that this time, His Majesty wanted to take advantage of the peak of the court's prestige to settle old scores with them? Most of the people in the imperial court could not participate in these matters, and they did not dare to continue guessing. It was better to let Prime Minister Qin and the others have a headache. As for whether the King of Shu could become the crown prince, although this matter was closely related to them, at least for now, at least it was not very important. The ancestral rules could not be violated. Even if His Majesty did not think highly of the King of Shu, two of the Empress's sons died prematurely in her early years. It was not until Princess Yongle was born that the imperial physician in the palace concluded that the Empress would never be able to conceive another child in this lifetime. Therefore, it was justifiable for the prince born by concubine Shui to become the crown prince. Moreover, countless officials in the imperial court, including Prime Minister Qin, supported the King of Shu's ascension to the throne. Under the circumstances of righteousness, even His Majesty could not violate the ancestral rules and the wishes of so many officials at the same time. Without any preparation, such a big shock suddenly occurred in the imperial court. Compared to this, other matters were naturally not so important. For example, yesterday, they learned from the juniors in their families that the King of Shu's invitation last night ended in discord. The Crown Prince of Ning, Li Xian, and the King of Shu had a falling out. The little Duke of Prime Minister Qin's family seemed to have encountered an assassin. These were all jokes between the juniors. No one would connect these two matters. His Majesty's small purge of Prime Minister Qin's family did not affect them. At the moment, the most important matter was another matter. The envoy of the Qi kingdom had arrived in the capital. He requested to see His Majesty twice in a row, but was rejected by His Majesty. The envoy of the Qi kingdom was waiting at the office of the Herald of Honor. His Majesty was preparing to hold another banquet in the palace to celebrate General Su Dingyuan's victorious return. All the civil and military officials in the imperial court, and all the nobles in the capital had to attend. This was like stabbing another knife in the chest of the envoy of the Qi kingdom. Without a doubt, the envoy was sent immediately after the war ended. It must be to discuss the matter of the 2 cities that had been captured. Judging from His Majesty's intention, it should be to give them the cold shoulder first. This was the first time in many years that he could hold his head up high like this. How could he not send a congratulatory gift? General Su Dingyuan would return to the capital today. The day of the celebration was chosen to be tonight. All the officials hurried home to have a good rest in preparation for tonight's grand event. Li Yi did not know that the old emperor was going to treat everyone to dinner tonight. He secretly rejoiced in his heart. Fortunately, he was careful this morning and did not eat too much for breakfast. Otherwise, he might eat too much later. It was still the same garden, and the same pavilion as last time. Even the dishes on the stone table had not changed much. The dignified emperor of a country now looked like an ordinary middle-aged man. He sat opposite Li Yi and ate a bowl of porridge and a few side dishes with relish. "I heard from Shanning that you are teaching her how to cook?" Jing Di asked casually, just like an ordinary person chatting with his neighbor. Li Yi had gradually adapted to the old emperor's face. It was normal for an important person to have some eccentricities. Perhaps this emperor had the hobby of disguising himself as a commoner after leaving court. "Princess Shanning wants to personally cook for your Majesty and her ladyship. At such a young age she is filial. This official also admires her." Li Yi did not stand on ceremony and said as he ate. Jing Di nodded. When he thought of Princess Shanning, a smile appeared on his face. All the princes and princesses were respectful to him. Only Shanning was different. She could let him experience the true feeling of being a father. This was something he could not experience from his other children. He put down the bowl and let Changde pour another bowl of porridge. He said, "I heard from Emingzu that you are treating Yongning's illness. How confident are you?" Jing Di looked at Li Yi and a glimmer of hope flashed in his eyes. Although the imperial doctors in the palace and countless folk doctors were helpless against Yongning's illness, Li Yi was different. If there was someone in this world who could give him a glimmer of hope for Yongning's illness, this person would only be Li Yi. Speaking of this, Li Yi's face became slightly solemn. He said, "To be honest, there is not much hope. I can only try my best." Jing Di's expression froze for a moment. Then he sighed and said, "That child has suffered a lot since she was young. Although I am the emperor of a country, I can do nothing about her illness. I know that you are a truly capable person. I hope that in my lifetime, I can see her like a normal person." Li Yi did not speak. Although this was also what he wanted, he was really not confident about it. He could only plan slowly. He did not know if he would see her again on the stone steps next to the Bowen Hall. "I know what you did in the Cold Mountain Temple. Master Tan Yin also praised you very much. Very good. The territory of the Jing Kingdom is not a place for the monks of the Qi Kingdom to show off." Jing Di quickly changed the topic. Li Yi began to be distracted from that moment. When he passed by the Bowen Hall, he did not seem to see her. The imperial palace was not a fun place. Lu Rui stood outside a palace and watched Li Yi teach a group of princesses and princes. She was even more uninterested in it. She looked at the slowly moving clouds in the distant sky with boredom. There was a slight sound of footsteps coming from the left corridor. She turned around and looked at the young woman who was walking towards her. Both of them were stunned. Li Yi walked out of the Bowen Hall and looked at the stone steps around him. There was a trace of disappointment on his face. Compared to him, a group of princesses and princes rushed out of the hall like a swarm of bees. Everyone had an excited smile on their faces, especially Prince Jean. His round body wished he could do a few somersaults on the ground. How could they not be happy? This was their last arithmetic class in the near future. For a long time to come, they would not see the teacher who would put their names on the palace wall. What else could make them happier than this? As for the homework he left for them, let them read and study arithmetic by themselves? What a joke! If they could understand those heavenly books by themselves, why would they need the teacher? In short, for a period of time, they would not have to face those strange symbols. It would be best if they would not see him again. Li stood outside the hall for a while. He was slightly disappointed that he did not see the person he wanted to see. But other than that, he felt that something was missing. After a while, he realized that Mississippi Lu was also missing. The palace was not the Willow Leaf Village, nor was it the Viscount's mansion. It would be a big deal if he just barged in. Mississippi Lu was obviously not the kind of person who would surrender to the palace guards. If they fought, there would be big trouble. Fortunately, as soon as this thought appeared in Li Yi's mind, he saw her and Emingzu walking towards him from another direction. "You are very good." Mississippi Lu tilted her head and looked at Emingzu. She said very seriously, "You too." Emingzu adjusted her cuffs and said with a smile. Li looked at the two of them suspiciously. When did they hook up? Could it be that they did it when he was teaching? But when they were in Qing'an Prefecture, Her Royal Highness often came to visit them. At that time, they never talked. "Where did you go just now?" Li looked at Mississippi Lu and asked in confusion. Mississippi Lu glanced at him and obviously did not want to talk. At this time, Emingzu had already let go of a prince who rushed out of the hall excitedly. She looked at Li Yi and asked in confusion. Li Han said that they don't need to attend mathematics class anymore. You let them learn mathematics by themselves? Li nodded. He looked at the little fatty Prince Jean, who was so excited that he wanted to fly to the sky. The corner of his mouth curled up. Did he really think that he could completely let go of himself without going to class? When he came back next time, the little fatty would understand what was called naivety. Why? How can they learn mathematics by themselves? Emingzu looked surprised. Even she had a hard time learning that kind of thing, let alone these children? In her opinion, this was simply an impossible task. Teacher's role is only to inspire and guide them. He can teach them very little. Mathematics is like the starry sky at night, vast and endless. In the end, they still have to explore and discover it by themselves. Li looked at Her Royal Highness and explained. Although these princes and princesses are young, they will grow up eventually. I am cultivating their ability to learn independently, and also to solve problems by themselves. I can't let teachers solve all the problems. Moreover, I have already written the textbooks for them. With their current foundation, it is not a problem for them to understand what is written in them. Actually, you are too lazy to teach them, right? Emingzu looked at him and asked. For this matter, he actually found such a dignified excuse. If she did not know him very well, she would think that what he said was very reasonable. No, although she knew that this was just an excuse, she could not deny that at this moment, she really felt that what he said was reasonable. Being tactful and reserved was a fine tradition of the Wuxia nation. When speaking, people would often beat around the bush before expressing their meaning. Even the Lu family's second young mistress, who had always been aloof from worldly affairs, was no exception. For example, he owed Mississippi Lu 100 taels of silver. Although she would be very serious about anything that involved money, at least Mississippi Lu would not point it out directly. For example, she would say that she wanted to buy a bolt of cloth, and that it was exactly 100 taels of silver. For another example, she would ask him with great concern for the 100 taels of silver she borrowed from him last time. Was the 100 taels of silver she borrowed from him last time? Also, she would tactfully ask Li Yi if the cloud floating in the sky looked like the 100 taels of silver she borrowed from him last time. Obviously, Her Royal Highness did not know how to be tactful like Mississippi Lu. Therefore, the atmosphere began to become awkward. Did father agree? She looked at Li Yi and asked. Of course. Li Yi replied without hesitation. Just a moment ago, he had reached an agreement on this matter with the old emperor. What a joke. He was able to fool an eminent monk like Master Tan Yin, and the monks of the Qi kingdom. It had always been the monks who fooled others. Would the old emperor be more difficult to deal with than them? Since father had already agreed, Emingzi naturally had nothing to say. She shook her head helplessly and said, I don't know if father has told you that the palace ban will be lifted tonight. There will be a banquet at Yonghe Palace for the officials. At the same time, it will be held to welcome General Su. As the county magistrate, you will also have to attend. Really? Li looked surprised. No one had told him about what Emingzi said just now. Chapter 390. If Li Yi's memory served him right. It had only been a few days since the old emperor held a banquet for the officials in the palace. The banquet for civil and military officials was naturally of a high standard. The king of Shu, who was petty and narrow-minded, could not be compared with it. No matter how rich the national treasury was, it would not be so wasteful. Even if it was to slap the faces of the ambassadors of the Qi kingdom and stab them in the chest, couldn't it be done in a simpler and more violent way? For example, throw a few heavenly punishment at the place where they lived? The cost of such a banquet was much lower than that of a banquet. It was totally worth considering. Can I not go? Li looked at Emingzi and asked. He had caused a lot of trouble when he attended the banquet of the king of Shu yesterday. If he messed up the banquet of the old emperor, he would have nowhere to run in the heavily guarded palace. Of course you can. But you have to tell my father yourself. Emingzi glanced at him and said. Li thought to himself that it was better to forget it. As the saying went, being in the king's company was like being with a tiger. Although this tiger was quite docile when he saw it, who knew when it would show its fangs? A tiger was a tiger after all. It was okay to look at it through the fence in the zoo. Only a fool would jump into the tiger mountain to look at it twice a day. Anyway, the main purpose of this visit had been achieved. It was time to discuss with Rui about going on a honeymoon. As for what would happen in the capital, whether the king of Shu would become the crown prince or not, and what conditions the ambassadors of the Qi kingdom would put forward, who cared? What an invitation from the empress. Li looked at the invitation in Rui's hand and was a little surprised. The old emperor was holding a party in Yonghe Palace, and the officials were invited. The empress was also holding a banquet in Phoenix Cry Hall. Of course, the guests were all the ladies of the capital and the wives of the officials. Normally, a county magistrate's wife was not qualified to attend, but Rui was also invited. At this time, she was holding the invitation and asking for Li Yi's opinion. Since it's the empress invitation, I'd better go. Li Yi thought it would be good for Rui to visit the palace. After all, there were not many opportunities like this. Moreover, this was the first time the empress had invited him. As the tigress with the highest status in the Jing kingdom, it would not be good to reject her. Li Yi didn't care about the banquet. He put it aside for the time being and whispered to Rui, "How's the preparation for that matter?" Rui was startled, then realized what he was talking about. She said in a low voice, "We are leaving, but we don't tell Rui and Xiaohuan. This is not good. We're only going out for a while. It's not like we're not coming back." Li shook his head. Which husband and wife would bring along their sister-in-law on their honeymoon? It was even more inappropriate to bring Xiaohuan but not her, so he decided not to bring any of them and sneaked off at night. When they found out, the two of them were already holding hands and standing at the bow of the ship watching the sunrise. Then okay. Rui lowered her head and whispered. She never had any different opinions about Li Yi's suggestions. Even if she did in the end, she would still be persuaded by him. When Xiaohuan walked into Li Yi's room with a pile of washed clothes in her arms, she looked suspiciously at the son-in-law and the young lady in the yard. A trace of vigilance appeared on her little face. These days, the young lady and son-in-law were very strange. Something that she didn't know was going to happen. She felt that she also needed to talk to the second young lady. The son-in-law and the young lady were now sleeping in the same room. In the whole family, only the second young lady was her strongest ally. After the hundreds of officials left the court and returned home, the news that General Su had returned to the capital and that His Majesty was going to hold a banquet tonight quickly spread throughout the capital. Everyone knew that the envoy of the Qi kingdom had arrived in the capital for several days, but His Majesty had not yet summoned him. Now that His Majesty was holding such a grand celebration banquet for General Su, there was no doubt that it was to embarrass the envoy of the Qi kingdom. After all, the entire Jing kingdom, whether it was the monarch or the ministers, had accumulated too much resentment over the years. The officials or dignitaries who were not of high rank but were lucky enough to be invited were naturally happy. They could boast about being able to attend the banquet tonight. Those who were not invited sighed in their hearts. It was such a pity that they could not witness such a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity with their own eyes. However, some people were happy while others were sad. Some people's minds were not on the banquet. Since last night, the servants of the King of Shu's mansion had been trembling with fear and trepidation in everything they did. They were even walking at a slower pace. Just this morning, His Highness had broken several teacups. When a servant was cleaning up the broken pieces, he accidentally made a little too much noise and was scolded by His Highness. He was so frightened that he even knocked his head on the ground. They were just servants of the king's mansion. They knew nothing except that several officials had come to the mansion to look for His Highness this morning. After they left, His Highness's mood became even worse. They just thought to themselves that they had to be more careful in their work and must not anger His Highness again. Compared with the King of Shu's mansion, the atmosphere in the Qin's mansion was not much better. After leaving the court, many officials did not even return to their own homes. About an hour after Prime Minister Qin returned to the mansion, they secretly changed into plain clothes and paid a visit. However, these people, including Prime Minister Qin's students, were all stopped outside by the gatekeeper. The reason was that Prime Minister Qin was not feeling well, and they could talk about anything in a few days. Everyone returned in disappointment. Those in the Qin's mansion who knew the inside story were also worried. "Father, what does His Majesty mean? Why was eldest brother suddenly transferred from the secretariat? There are several other edicts. They are simply aimed at father and the Qin family. Those officials are waiting outside. Father, do you want to meet them?" Everyone came forward to ask. The old man sitting on the chair frowned and said, "There is no need to talk about this. How can we talk about His Majesty's thoughts? I am loyal to His Majesty and the Jing kingdom. The sun, the moon, and the heaven and earth can prove it. Things are not what you think." Prime Minister Qin took a sip of tea. After he calmed down, he frowned slightly again. His Majesty's action this morning was beyond his expectation. Although it was a spring breeze and rain, there was a thunder hidden in the dark. He did not think that he had done anything wrong to His Majesty. Everything he did was for the sake of the Jing kingdom and the people. Why did His Majesty do this? Was it because of the King of Shu? No matter from which point of view. The King of Shu was the only candidate to inherit the throne. Even His Majesty could not change this. Otherwise, there would be great turmoil in the court. He believed that His Majesty himself did not want to see such a scene. He looked up and saw a person in the hall with a white cloth wrapped around his neck. He frowned again and looked at the young man and asked, "What's going on?" "It's a small matter." Qin Yu twitched the corner of his mouth and said indifferently, "These days, you'd better be more stable. Don't go to the King of Shu so often." Although he was extremely disappointed with this grandson, he was the only direct descendant after all. So Prime Minister Qin could not help but exhort him. Qin Yu did not answer. The expression on his face did not change at all. It was unknown whether he had heard it or not. Prime Minister Qin looked a little thoughtful and said, "His Majesty is holding a banquet in the palace tonight. You and I will go together." Tonight's banquet was not limited to the officials. For people like them, it was normal to bring a member of the younger generation to show his face in front of everyone. You're tuning in to the Limei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.